Beneath the scorching sands of modern day, Iraq lies a secret that has captivated humanity for over 4 millennia. In the ruins of ancient temples and royal palaces, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of beings so powerful, so mysterious, that their very names caused ancient kings to tremble. These were not ordinary gods worshipped in simple ceremonies. They were the Anunnaki, divine rulers whose influence stretched across heaven, earth, and the underworld itself. Their story begins in the cradle of civilization, where the first cities rose from the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, in cuneiform script pressed into clay tablets, scribes recorded encounters with beings who possessed knowledge beyond human comprehension. What they left behind would challenge everything we thought we knew about the origins of religion, kingship, and human civilization itself. 1. The dawn of divine records. Picture this. A Sumerian scribe sits cross-legged in a dimly lit temple chamber, carefully pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay. The year is approximately 2144 BCE, during the reign of King Gudea. What he's recording will become the earliest known written reference to beings called the Anunnaki. This moment represents something extraordinary in human history. These inscriptions, discovered centuries later by archaeologists sifting through ancient ruins, are nearly 4,200 years old. To put this in perspective, they predate Christianity by over 2 millennia and Buddhism by several centuries. When Gudea's scribes carved these sacred names into clay, they were documenting a religious tradition already ancient by their standards. The tablets speak of divine beings who commanded both reverence and terror, whose decisions shaped the fate of entire civilizations. Modern scholars, hunched over microscopes in museum laboratories, still struggle to fully decode the mysteries contained within these primordial texts. 2. The treasure trove of London. In the heart of London, within the hallowed halls of the British Museum, lies one of archaeology's greatest treasures. Deep in climate-controlled storage rooms, approximately 30,000 cuneiform tablets from the Kiyunjik excavations rest on metal shelves. Each tablet is a window into an ancient world, and many contain references to the mysterious Anunnaki. Yet here's the shocking truth. Only a fraction of these priceless artifacts have been fully translated and published. Imagine walking through rows upon rows of these clay records, each one potentially containing revelations about humanity's earliest religious beliefs. The tablets range from official royal decrees to personal letters, from religious hymns to administrative records. Some are perfectly preserved, their cuneiform script as sharp as the day it was pressed into clay. Others are fragmentary, broken pieces of a vast puzzle that scholars are still attempting to solve. The untranslated tablets represent countless untold stories about the Anunnaki, their relationships with humans, and their role in shaping ancient civilization. Every year, new translations emerge, adding fresh chapters to this incredible saga. 3. Gods in Crisis. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature, and within its ancient verses lies a startling revelation about the Anunnaki. In Tablet 11, housed in the British Museum as Artifact K.3375, we encounter these supposedly all-powerful deities in an unexpected state. During the Great Flood that nearly destroyed all life on Earth, the epic describes the Anunnaki as sitting in thirst and hunger. This single line revolutionizes our understanding of these ancient gods. Unlike later religious traditions that portrayed deities as completely self-sufficient and omnipotent, the Anunnaki possessed very human vulnerabilities. They required sustenance, they experienced physical discomfort, and they depended on human worship and offerings for their well-being. Picture these mighty gods, normally depicted with terrifying splendor, reduced to desperate hunger as the floodwaters rage below. The image is both humbling and terrifying, divine beings powerful enough to unleash global destruction, yet dependent on the very humans they ruled. This dependency suggests a complex relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity, one built on mutual need rather than simple domination. It reveals that even in humanity's earliest religious imagination, gods were conceived as beings with limitations and needs. 4. Divine right to rule. Hidden within the well-blundell prism lies one of history's most significant political documents. This ancient artifact contains the most complete version of the Sumerian king list, a record that would establish the foundation for thousands of years of political theory. The text makes an extraordinary claim: legitimate rulership descended from heaven through the Anunnaki. This simple phrase represents the birth of the divine right to rule, a concept that would echo through civilizations from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe. Before this moment in history, leadership may have been based on strength, charisma, or tribal consensus. But the Sumerian king list introduced something revolutionary: the idea that true authority came from divine appointment. Kings could no longer simply claim power through conquest or inheritance. They needed to prove their connection to the Anunnaki. This requirement transformed politics into a sacred act, making rebellion against earthly rulers equivalent to defying the gods themselves. The psychological impact was profound. Subjects who might challenge a merely human ruler would hesitate to oppose someone blessed by the Anunnaki. This concept of divine legitimacy would influence political systems for millennia, appearing in various forms across cultures worldwide. 5. The administrative gods. At the ancient city of Mari, archaeologists made a discovery that shattered preconceptions about how the Anunnaki functioned in daily life. Among the ruins, they uncovered over 25,000 cuneiform tablets, a treasure trove of administrative records spanning centuries. What shocked researchers was how frequently the Anunnaki appeared in these mundane documents. These weren't mythological texts or religious hymns, but everyday bureaucratic records: tax collections, trade agreements, judicial decisions, and government correspondence. The tablets reveal that the Anunnaki weren't distant, mythological figures relegated to temples and festivals. They were active participants in the day-to-day governance of Mesopotamian city-states. Officials routinely invoked their authority when making important decisions, collected taxes in their names, and consulted their will through divination before major undertakings. This integration of divine and earthly authority created a unique form of government where secular and religious power were inseparable. City administrators weren't just bureaucrats. They were servants of the Anunnaki, carrying out divine will through paperwork and policy. The discovery transformed scholarly understanding of ancient Mesopotamian society, revealing a civilization where gods weren't abstract concepts but active governmental partners in managing human affairs. 6. The meaning behind the name. Deep within the structure of the Sumerian language lies a revelation about the true nature of the Anunnaki. The term itself, when broken down into its component parts, tells a story that ancient scribes embedded in the very letters they carved into clay. Anunnaki derives from the Sumerian and Unnaki, which translates literally as princely seed or offspring of an. This wasn't random naming. It was a carefully constructed title that revealed their divine status. An represented the sky god, the supreme deity of the Sumerian pantheon. Unnaki meant princely or noble, while Ki indicated offspring or descendants. Together, these syllables proclaim that the Anunnaki weren't merely gods among many. They were divine royalty, the noble children of the highest deity. This linguistic construction implies a divine hierarchy as complex as any earthly royal court. Just as human societies distinguished between commoners and nobility, the divine realm had its own aristocratic structure with the Anunnaki at its apex. The name itself became a title of such power that speaking it incorrectly was considered dangerous. Ancient priests underwent years of training to properly pronounce these sacred syllables, understanding that words themselves possess divine power. 7. The divine census. Within the pages of the Enuma Elish, Babylon's grand creation epic, lies a startling piece of divine mathematics that reveals the organizational complexity of the Anunnaki pantheon. The text provides an exact count, 600 Anunnaki gods in total. But this wasn't simply a random number thrown into an ancient story. The epic carefully divides these divine beings with mathematical precision, 300 assigned to heaven and 300 to earth, creating a perfect balance between celestial and terrestrial authority. This numerical precision suggests something remarkable about Mesopotamian religious thought. Rather than conceiving of gods as countless, undefined spirits, they organized the divine realm with the same careful structure they applied to their armies, bureaucracies, and temple hierarchies. Each of these 600 beings had specific roles, jurisdictions, and responsibilities. Some governed natural phenomena, like storms and rivers. Others oversaw human activities like agriculture and warfare, while still others managed the complex machinery of fate and destiny. The number 600 itself carried symbolic weight in Mesopotamian mathematics, representing completion and cosmic order. By assigning exactly this number to the Anunnaki, the epic's authors were making a statement about divine perfection and universal balance. This represents one of the largest documented pantheons in ancient history, dwarfing the dozen or so major gods of most other cultures. 8. The sacred city's divine inhabitants. In the shadow of ancient ziggurats, archaeologists working through the ruins of Nippur made a discovery that illuminated the complex relationship between geography and divine authority in Mesopotamian religion. Cuneiform tablets unearthed from the sacred precinct contained references to exactly 50 Anunnaki specifically associated with the nearby city of Eridu. This revelation was more significant than mere record-keeping. It suggested that different cities maintained distinct relationships with different groups of Anunnaki, creating a divine network that mirrored the political complexity of Mesopotamian city-states. Eridu held special significance as the oldest city in Sumerian tradition, believed to be the first city ever built. According to ancient texts, it was here that kingship first descended from heaven, making it the birthplace of organized human civilization. The 50 Anunnaki associated with Eridu weren't just random assignments. Each likely had specific connections to the city's founding, its patron deities, or its role in the larger cosmic order. Some may have been involved in the city's mythical creation, others in its protection, and still others in its governance. This localized divine association meant that traveling between cities in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't just a geographical journey. It was a movement between different divine jurisdictions, each with its own spiritual rules and protections. 9. The First Labor Dispute. Hidden within the verses of the Atrahasis epic lies what may be history's most extraordinary labor dispute, one that involved gods rather than humans and ultimately led to the creation of our species. The story begins with a problem in the divine realm. The Anunnaki had assigned the demanding physical labor of maintaining the universe to a group of younger gods called the Igigi. For what the text suggests were eons, these divine workers toiled without complaint, digging rivers, building mountains, and maintaining the cosmic order. But eventually, the Igigi reached their breaking point. In scenes that read remarkably like modern labor protests, they threw down their tools, burned their equipment, and marched on the houses of the Anunnaki leadership to demand better working conditions. The situation created a crisis in the divine realm. The essential work of maintaining creation couldn't stop, but the workers refused to continue under existing conditions. The Anunnaki found themselves facing the world's first organized labor rebellion. Their solution was revolutionary: create a new species to take over the heavy labor. Using clay mixed with divine essence, they fashioned humanity specifically to serve as workers, freeing the Igigi from their burdensome duties. This makes humanity, according to Mesopotamian theology, the product of a divine labor negotiation. 10. The challenge of ancient language. Modern scholars face a unique challenge when studying Anunnaki texts, one that goes to the heart of how ancient languages recorded meaning. Cuneiform writing, the system used to record most Anunnaki references, presents a linguistic puzzle that continues to frustrate and fascinate researchers. The complexity lies in cuneiform's polysemic nature. individual signs can represent multiple concepts depending on context. A single wedge-shaped symbol might represent a sound, a word, an idea, or even multiple ideas simultaneously. When ancient scribes wrote about the Anunnaki, they sometimes used signs that could be interpreted in several different ways. Modern translators must consider not just the literal meaning of symbols, but their cultural context, religious significance, and relationship to surrounding text. This ambiguity has led to ongoing scholarly debates about fundamental questions regarding the Anunnaki. Were they conceived as physical beings or abstract concepts? Did certain texts describe literal events or symbolic representations? How should we interpret descriptions of their appearance and actions? Each new translation potentially revises our understanding of these ancient deities. What seems certain about Anunnaki mythology a century ago has been refined, revised, or sometimes completely overturned by more sophisticated linguistic analysis. The challenge continues as scholars develop new methods for understanding ancient Mesopotamian thought through the lens of its complex writing system. 11. The Mountain King of Destiny. Among all the Anunnaki, one figure towers above the rest with such overwhelming authority that his very name became synonymous with divine power itself. Enlil, known throughout Mesopotamia as the Great Mountain, wielded control over perhaps the most significant object in the entire cosmos, the Tablets of Destiny. These weren't ordinary writing tablets, but cosmic instruments that determined the fate of all creation. Whoever possessed the Tablets of Destiny held the power to reshape reality itself, to decree the rise and fall of nations, the lives and deaths of individuals, and the very laws that govern existence. Enlil's control of these tablets made him arguably more powerful than any single deity in later religious traditions. While other gods might rule over specific domains, love, war, wisdom, or death, Enlil commanded the fundamental forces that shaped everything that was, is, or ever would be. Ancient texts describe petitioners approaching Enlil's mountain throne with trembling reverence, knowing that his decisions were irrevocable and absolute. Kings and commoners alike understood that their destinies were literally written by his hand on tablets of cosmic significance. The concept of fate itself, which would become central to many philosophical and religious traditions, originated with this image of Enlil carefully inscribing the future on his divine tablets. 12. Master of the Cosmic Waters. In the depths of Mesopotamian cosmology flows a concept so fundamental that it shaped how ancient peoples understood their entire world. They believed that beneath the earth lay the Abzu, a vast underground ocean of fresh water that surrounded and supported all creation. Enki, also known as Ea in later traditions, held dominion over this cosmic sea and bore the magnificent title Stag of the Abzu. This wasn't merely a poetic designation. It represented control over the source of all life-giving water on Earth. Every spring that bubbled up from the ground, every well that provided fresh water, every river that nourished crops, all were manifestations of Enki's power over the Abzu. Without his benevolence, the world would become a barren wasteland unable to support life. The stag's symbolism wasn't accidental. In Mesopotamian imagery, stags represented vitality, fertility, and the connection between earth and heaven. By depicting Enki as the cosmic stag, ancient peoples emphasized his role as the bridge between the underground waters and the surface world. This made Enki one of the most practically important deities in daily life. Farmers prayed to him for irrigation, cities depended on his goodwill for their water supplies, and travelers invoked his protection when crossing rivers or seeking oases in the desert. 13. The Divine Mother's Secret Recipe. Among the Anunnaki, one figure holds the distinction of being called Mother of the Gods, a title that encompasses one of the most profound creation myths in human history. Ninhursag's story contains elements that would echo through religious traditions for millennia to come. According to ancient Mesopotamian texts, Ninhursag possessed the knowledge and power to create life itself. But her method of creating humanity reveals a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between divine and mortal existence that goes far beyond simple magical thinking. The goddess didn't create humans from nothing or from simple earth alone. Instead, she carefully mixed clay, representing the material, earthly nature of humanity, with divine blood, symbolizing the spark of consciousness and spiritual awareness that separates humans from other creatures. This creation myth suggests that humans possess a dual nature. We are simultaneously earthly beings bound by physical limitations and divine beings capable of transcendent thought and spiritual connection. This duality explains human struggles between base desires and higher aspirations. The mixing of clay and divine blood also implies that humans carry actual genetic material from the gods themselves. This makes humanity not just created by the divine, but literally related to them, distant relatives of the Anunnaki sharing both material and spiritual heritage. This concept of divine-human genetic mixing represents one of the earliest creation myths to suggest biological connections between gods and mortals. 14. The ultimate divine takeover. In the annals of divine politics, no story is more dramatic than the rise of Marduk from obscure local deity to supreme ruler of the Babylonian pantheon. His ascension represents what might be called history's greatest divine corporate takeover, a theological reorganization that reshaped Mesopotamian religion. Originally, Marduk was a relatively minor god associated with the city of Babylon. But as Babylon grew in political power and eventually conquered much of Mesopotamia, its patron deity underwent a corresponding rise in divine status. The Enuma Elish chronicles this transformation in epic detail. According to the text, Marduk gradually absorbed the powers, attributes, and authorities of 50 other gods, including many Anunnaki. This wasn't simple conquest, it was systematic theological integration. Each absorbed deity didn't disappear, but became an aspect of Marduk's expanded divine portfolio. He gained control over their domains, inherited their worshippers, and incorporated their mythologies into his own expanding legend. This divine consolidation paralleled political reality. As Babylon conquered neighboring cities, the religious establishments needed to explain how their new ruler's god could legitimately govern territories previously protected by other deities. The solution was to transform Marduk into a super deity whose authority encompassed all previously separate divine jurisdictions. This created a more centralized divine monarchy that matched Babylon's centralized earthly government. 15. The goddess of divine contradiction. Among the Anunnaki, perhaps no deity embodies the complexity of divine nature more perfectly than Inanna, known to later cultures as Ishtar. Her dual portfolio as goddess of both love and war reveals something profound about how ancient peoples understood the fundamental forces that drive human existence. At first glance, love and war seem like opposite concepts. Love represents harmony, creation, and peaceful connection between people. War embodies conflict, destruction, and violent separation. Yet Inanna's worship recognized these as intimately connected aspects of the same underlying divine energy. Ancient Mesopotamians understood that passion, whether erotic or martial, springs from the same intense emotional source. The fury that drives warriors into battle shares psychological roots with the desire that draws lovers together. Both involve the abandonment of rational calculation in favor of overwhelming feeling. Inanna's temples served both functions simultaneously. Warriors sought her blessing before battle, while couples prayed for her favor in their relationships. Sacred prostitution and military recruiting might occur in the same temple complex, recognizing both as expressions of her divine influence. This integration of seemingly opposite forces made Inanna one of the most powerful and feared Anunnaki. She could inspire both devastating wars and overwhelming love, sometimes simultaneously, creating the kind of divine passion that could reshape entire civilizations. 16. The Seven Judges of the Dead. In the shadowy depths of the underworld, where the souls of the dead must journey after leaving their earthly bodies. 7 Anunnaki sit in eternal judgment. Their story, preserved in the haunting poem The Descent of Inanna, establishes one of humanity's earliest concepts of divine judgment after death. These 7 judges weren't minor functionaries, but powerful Anunnaki whose authority extended even over other gods. When the mighty goddess Inanna descended to the underworld, she too faced their scrutiny and judgment, demonstrating that divine law applied universally. The underworld courtroom where they held session was described as a place of terrifying solemnity. The 7 judges sat in positions of absolute authority, their eyes described as flashing like lightning, their voices echoing through the chambers of the dead. Each soul that appeared before them faced examination of their entire life. The judges reviewed actions, intentions, and the complex web of relationships that had defined each person's earthly existence. Their verdicts determined not just punishment or reward, but the fundamental nature of the soul's continuing existence. This concept of post-mortem divine judgment would influence religious traditions throughout the ancient world and beyond. The idea that death isn't the end, but rather the beginning of a cosmic legal proceeding, became central to how humans understood mortality and moral responsibility. 17. Divine class warfare. Long before human societies developed complex social hierarchies, the divine realm itself was already organized according to principles of class distinction that would seem familiar to any student of social structure. The relationship between the Anunnaki and the Igigi represents one of history's earliest documented examples of class-based organization among deities. The Anunnaki occupied the position of divine aristocracy, the elite ruling class of the cosmic order. They held the positions of ultimate authority, made the fundamental decisions about universal governance, and enjoyed the privileges that came with supreme power. Below them in the divine hierarchy were the Igigi, who functioned as the working class of the divine realm. They performed the essential labor that kept the universe functioning, maintaining cosmic order, managing natural phenomena, and carrying out the practical implementations of Anunnaki decisions. This divine class system mirrored and perhaps inspired similar structures in human society. Just as earthly nobles lived lives of relative leisure while peasants performed essential labor, the Anunnaki enjoyed positions of authority while the Igigi handled the demanding physical work of cosmic maintenance. The parallel wasn't accidental. Ancient Mesopotamians believed that earthly social structures reflected divine templates. The existence of divine social classes provided theological justification for human inequality, suggesting that hierarchy was a fundamental principle of cosmic order rather than mere human invention. 18. Crowns of divine authority. In the divine realm of the Anunnaki, power wasn't just wielded, it was displayed through one of the most striking visual symbols in ancient art: elaborate horned crowns that immediately communicated the wearer's position in the cosmic hierarchy. Individual Anunnaki possessed crowns adorned with specific numbers of horns, and these weren't random decorative elements. Each pair of ox horns represented a measurable degree of divine authority, with the most powerful deities wearing crowns bearing up to 7 pairs of these sacred symbols. The symbolism was both practical and profound. In a pantheon of 600 deities, visual identification became essential. When divine beings appeared to humans in dreams, visions, or physical manifestations, the number of horns on their crowns immediately communicated their relative importance and the level of respect they commanded. Ox horns specifically carried deep symbolic meaning in Mesopotamian culture. Oxen represented strength, fertility, and productive power, the ability to transform the natural world through directed energy. By wearing ox horns, the Anunnaki proclaimed their role as cosmic forces capable of reshaping reality itself. The hierarchy was absolute. A deity with 7 pairs of horns commanded unquestioning obedience from one wearing only 3 pairs. This visual system prevented confusion and maintained divine order through clearly established chains of command. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal artistic depictions of these horned crowns, providing modern scholars with windows into ancient divine protocol. 19. The substance of terror and wonder. Among the most mysterious aspects of Anunnaki manifestation was their possession of a supernatural substance called melem, a divine radiance that could physically affect human beings who encountered it. Ancient texts describe this phenomenon with both awe and terror, suggesting the divine presence was literally visible and tangible. The melem wasn't simply light or aura in the abstract sense. Mesopotamian sources describe it as a substance that covered them in terrifying splendor, creating a visual effect so overwhelming that humans experienced physical symptoms upon witnessing it. Those who beheld Anunnaki surrounded by melem reported experiencing intense, tingling sensations throughout their bodies. Some texts suggest that prolonged exposure could cause temporary paralysis or unconsciousness, as if the human nervous system couldn't process the intensity of divine radiance. This physical response to divine presence suggests that ancient Mesopotamians conceived of the gods as beings who operated on fundamentally different energy frequencies than ordinary matter. Their very existence generated fields of power that interfaced with physical reality in measurable ways. The melem served multiple functions. It identified divine beings unmistakably. It inspired appropriate reverence and fear in human observers, and it demonstrated the vast gulf between mortal and immortal existence. No human could mistake an Anunnaki surrounded by melem for an ordinary being, no matter how the deity might otherwise appear. 20. Giants among mortals. Ancient Mesopotamian artists didn't depict the Anunnaki as ethereal spirits or abstract concepts, but as physical beings of imposing stature whose very appearance commanded respect and inspired awe. Archaeological evidence from cylinder seals, temple reliefs, and royal monuments consistently portrays them as beings of tremendous physical size. The artistic conventions weren't arbitrary or symbolic. Ancient texts specifically describe Anunnaki as possessing bodies of extraordinary dimensions, with particular emphasis on their muscular development and overall physical presence. Their lower legs, in particular, were depicted with exaggerated musculature that suggested superhuman strength. This physical imposingness served important theological and political functions. In cultures where physical prowess often determined leadership, divine beings needed to appear capable of backing their authority with overwhelming force. The Anunnaki's size communicated their ability to enforce their will through physical power, if necessary. The consistent artistic depiction across different time periods and city-states suggests these weren't creative interpretations, but standardized representations based on established theological understanding. Whether describing actual physical encounters or theological concepts, Mesopotamian culture maintained consistent ideas about Anunnaki appearance. Modern viewers examining ancient Anunnaki artwork often note the impressive physical presence these depictions convey. Even translated into stone and clay, these ancient artists managed to capture a sense of overwhelming divine physicality that continues to impress observers thousands of years later. 21. The Eternal Temple. Deep in the ancient city of Nippur stands one of archaeology's most remarkable testimonies to religious devotion, the Iker Temple, dedicated to the mighty Enlil. What makes this structure extraordinary isn't just its impressive architecture or sacred significance, but the sheer span of time it remained active. For over 3,000 years, from approximately 2,100 BCE to 1,000 CE, this temple maintained continuous religious function. To put this in perspective, the Iker Temple was already ancient when Rome was founded, and it continued operating long after the Roman Empire fell. Generations upon generations of priests served within its walls, performing rituals that remained essentially unchanged across millennia. Kings from dozens of different dynasties made pilgrimages to its sacred chambers, seeking Enlil's blessing for their reigns. The temple's longevity speaks to the enduring power of Anunnaki worship. Political systems rose and fell. Languages evolved and changed. Entire civilizations emerged and disappeared. Yet the Eker Temple continued its sacred function. Archaeological layers reveal continuous renovation and rebuilding, showing how each generation invested in maintaining this connection to the divine. Modern visitors can still walk among its ruins, touching stones that witnessed over 3 millennia of human devotion to the Anunnaki. 22. The Royal Cemetery's Dark Secret. In the 1920s, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley made a discovery at UR that would shock the archaeological world and provide unprecedented insight into Anunnaki worship practices. The Royal Cemetery revealed not just incredible treasures, but evidence of religious practices that modern minds find difficult to comprehend. Among the more than 2,000 artifacts recovered from the cemetery were exquisite cylinder seals depicting Anunnaki deities in scenes of divine power and cosmic authority. But these treasures came with a dark accompaniment: the remains of 74 human beings who had been sacrificed to serve their rulers in the afterlife. The cemetery wasn't simply a burial ground, but a staging area for what ancient Mesopotamians believed was a journey to serve the Anunnaki in the divine realm. The sacrificed individuals, servants, soldiers, musicians, and courtiers, had apparently consumed poison and arranged themselves in orderly rows around their deceased rulers. This wasn't random violence, but carefully orchestrated religious theater. The dead were elaborately dressed, positioned with their possessions, and prepared for eternal service to both their earthly masters and the Anunnaki they would encounter in the afterlife. The discovery forced archaeologists to confront the reality that Anunnaki worship sometimes demanded ultimate human sacrifice, transforming death into a form of divine service. 23. The Queen of Night's Mystery. In the British Museum's collection stands one of the most enigmatic and beautiful artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia, the Burney relief, also known as the Queen of the Night. This extraordinary piece presents a figure that may represent an Anunnaki deity in one of her most terrifying and magnificent aspects. The relief depicts a winged goddess with bird talons instead of feet, flanked by owls and standing atop lions. Her nudity suggests divine power that transcends human modesty, while her wings indicate her ability to move between heaven and earth at will. Every detail of the carving speaks to divine authority and supernatural power. The owls accompanying her connect to ancient associations with wisdom and nighttime mysteries, while the lions beneath her feet represent her dominion over the fiercest earthly powers. Some scholars believe this figure represents Inanna/Ishtar in her underworld aspect, when she descended to challenge the powers of death itself. Others argue it depicts Lilith or another powerful female, Anunnaki, associated with the night and its dangerous mysteries. The relief's sophisticated artistry demonstrates the skill ancient craftsmen brought to depicting divine figures. Even today, the Queen of Night's piercing gaze and commanding presence create an almost hypnotic effect on museum visitors who encounter her image. 24. The Lost Art of Divine Craftsmanship. Among the most technically impressive artifacts left by ancient Mesopotamian civilization are the cylinder seals used to mark documents and property with divine authority. These small cylindrical objects, carved with intricate scenes of Anunnaki deities, represent a level of craftsmanship that continues to baffle modern artisans. The seals were carved from precious materials including hematite, obsidian, lapis lazuli, and amethyst, stones chosen not just for their beauty, but for their symbolic connections to divine power and cosmic forces. What makes these artifacts truly remarkable is the precision of their carving. Working with primitive tools on extremely hard materials, ancient craftsmen created scenes of incredible detail and artistic sophistication. Modern attempts to replicate these seals using traditional techniques have largely failed. Contemporary artisans, even with access to detailed photographs and archaeological analysis, struggle to achieve the same level of precision and artistic quality that ancient craftsmen routinely produced. The seals weren't just decorative objects but functional tools that had to roll smoothly across clay surfaces while producing clear, detailed impressions. This required understanding of both artistic composition and mechanical engineering that suggests a level of technical knowledge that has been lost to time. Each seal represents hours of painstaking work by master craftsmen who viewed their art as a form of divine service. 25. Colors that defied time. Hidden within the Louvre Museum in Paris lies a treasure that provides a rare glimpse into how ancient Mesopotamians actually saw their divine world. The investiture of Zimri Lim fresco, one of the few surviving examples of Mesopotamian wall painting. This extraordinary artwork shows divine figures in vivid colors that have survived over 4,000 years of time, war, and environmental exposure. The pigments, blues, reds, whites, and golds, remain brilliant enough to give modern viewers a sense of how magnificent ancient Anunnaki temples must have appeared in their original glory. The fresco depicts the king receiving divine authority directly from Anunnaki deities, showing the moment when earthly and celestial power intersect. The gods are portrayed in flowing robes of heavenly blue, with golden ornaments that seem to glow with divine light. Most ancient wall paintings have been destroyed by time, making this survival almost miraculous. The colors were created using mineral pigments and techniques that ancient artists guarded as sacred knowledge, passed down through generations of temple painters. The fresco transforms our understanding of ancient religious spaces. Rather than the bare stone ruins we see today, Anunnaki temples were originally environments of overwhelming visual splendor designed to immerse worshippers in divine beauty. Standing before this ancient masterpiece, modern viewers can almost feel the awe that ancient Mesopotamians experienced when entering sacred spaces dedicated to the Anunnaki. 26. The paradox of individual worship. Archaeological surveys across ancient Mesopotamia have revealed a surprising fact about Anunnaki worship. Despite their collective name and group identity, no temples have been discovered that were exclusively dedicated to the Anunnaki as a unified pantheon. This discovery fundamentally changed scholarly understanding of how these deities functioned in daily religious practice. Rather than being worshipped as a collective group, individual Anunnaki maintained separate cult centers, distinct ritual practices, and independent religious hierarchies. Each major Anunnaki deity commanded their own temples, priesthoods, and festivals. Enlil ruled from Nippur, Inanna from Uruk, Enki from Eridu, and so forth. Worshippers typically developed personal relationships with specific Anunnaki rather than offering generic prayers to the group as a whole. This individualized worship system created a complex religious landscape where different cities might have conflicting loyalties based on their patron Anunnaki. Political alliances often followed religious lines, with cities united by shared devotion to particular deities. The absence of collective Anunnaki temples suggests that ancient Mesopotamians understood these beings as distinct personalities with separate spheres of influence rather than interchangeable representatives of divine power. This personalized approach to divine relationships would influence religious practices throughout the ancient world, establishing patterns of individual deity worship that continue in various forms today. 27. Buried promises to the gods. Beneath the foundation stones of ancient Mesopotamian temples lies evidence of one of history's most fascinating religious practices: deliberate burial of precious objects and royal statues intended to ensure perpetual divine favor. Kings didn't simply build temples and hope for the best. They literally buried their images in foundation deposits, creating permanent physical reminders of their devotion that would persist even if their surface monuments were destroyed. These foundation deposits contained far more than simple offerings. Archaeologists have discovered elaborate collections including precious metals, gemstones, inscribed tablets recording the ruler's pious acts, and carefully crafted statues showing the king in poses of worship and submission. The practice reveals sophisticated theological thinking about the relationship between physical presence and spiritual connection. By placing their images within the temple's very foundation, rulers created a form of eternal prayer. Their stone selves would continue worshiping the Anunnaki long after their biological deaths. The deposits also served political functions, establishing permanent records of which rulers had contributed to each temple's construction and maintenance. Future kings who discovered these buried treasures would know exactly who their pious predecessors had been. Some deposits contain multiple layers from different time periods, showing how successive rulers added their own contributions to existing collections, creating archaeological time capsules of royal devotion to the Anunnaki. 28. Divine communion through sacred straws. Among the treasures recovered from UR's Royal Cemetery, the standard of UR stands out not just for its artistic beauty, but for its depiction of what may be humanity's earliest recorded divine communion rituals. The artifact shows elaborate banquet scenes where figures drink through remarkably long straws for what appear to be communal vessels. While this might seem like simple artistic decoration, the context and religious setting suggest something far more significant. These weren't ordinary drinking parties, but sacred ceremonies where participants shared beverages believed to contain divine essence or to facilitate spiritual connection with the Anunnaki. The long straws ensured that multiple people could partake simultaneously from the same sacred vessel. The practice parallels communion rituals found in many later religious traditions, suggesting that the concept of sharing divine substance through ritual consumption has very ancient roots. Participants weren't just drinking, they were incorporating divine power into their physical bodies. The elaborate nature of the depicted ceremony, with musicians, servants, and carefully arranged seating, indicates that these communion rituals were major religious events requiring extensive preparation and coordination. Archaeological analysis of similar vessels found in other sites suggests that these divine communion practices were widespread throughout Mesopotamian civilization, creating shared religious experiences that bonded communities together through collective participation in divine mysteries. 29. The Morgan Library's hidden treasures. Deep within the climate-controlled vaults of the Morgan Library in New York lies one of the world's most comprehensive collections of Mesopotamian religious art. Over 1,400 cylinder seals, spanning an incredible 3,200 years of continuous artistic tradition. This collection represents more than mere artistic artifacts. It's a visual encyclopedia of evolving Anunnaki worship that captures how divine understanding changed across millennia of human civilization. Among these seals are combinations of Anunnaki deities and religious symbols that appear nowhere else in the archaeological record. Some show divine interactions that aren't documented in any surviving texts, while others present familiar gods in unexpected contexts or relationships. The chronological span of the collection allows scholars to trace the evolution of religious ideas with unprecedented precision. Early seals show simpler depictions of individual Anunnaki, while later examples present complex narrative scenes involving multiple deities engaged in cosmic dramas. Each seal was commissioned by individuals who wanted to carry divine protection with them in their daily lives. The variety of scenes suggests that people developed highly personal relationships with specific aspects of Anunnaki worship, choosing divine images that reflected their particular needs and spiritual concerns. New discoveries within the collection continue to surprise researchers, with advanced imaging techniques revealing previously unnoticed details that add fresh insights to our understanding of ancient Mesopotamian religious practices. 30. The hidden city beneath. Modern technology has revolutionized archaeology, and nowhere is this more evident than in recent ground-penetrating radar surveys of known Mesopotamian archaeological sites. These high-tech investigations have detected numerous unexcavated structures beneath areas that archaeologists thought they had thoroughly explored. The implications are staggering. If current sites, many of which have been excavated for over a century, still contain undiscovered buildings, the amount of Anunnaki-related material remaining hidden underground could be enormous. Ground-penetrating radar can detect variations in soil density that indicate buried walls, floors, and architectural features without disturbing the ground surface. At sites like Babylon, Ur, and Nippur, these surveys have revealed complex networks of buildings extending far beyond the areas that have been excavated. Some of these buried structures appear to be temples or religious complexes based on their size and architectural layout. Others might be administrative buildings where Anunnaki-related business was conducted, or residential areas where priests and religious officials lived. The discovery of so much unexcavated material suggests that our current understanding of Anunnaki worship is based on only a fraction of the available evidence. Each new excavation has the potential to revolutionize scholarly understanding of these ancient deities and their role in human civilization. Future generations of archaeologists will have access to information that could completely transform how we understand the relationship between the Anunnaki and ancient Mesopotamian society. 31. The axis of divine order. Throughout Mesopotamian art, one symbol appears with such frequency and consistency that it clearly held profound religious significance. The Tree of Life, a motif that represents far more than simple vegetation or natural beauty. This sacred tree symbolized the cosmic axis, the invisible line connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld along which all divine power flowed. At crucial points along this axis, Anunnaki deities served as guardians, controlling the flow of divine energy between the different levels of reality. The Tree of Life wasn't conceived as a single physical object, but as a cosmic principle that manifested wherever divine and earthly realms intersected. Temples, palaces, and sacred groves all functioned as points where this divine axis touched the material world. Artistic depictions show the tree with elaborate branches reaching toward heaven and roots extending deep into the underworld. Anunnaki deities are typically shown tending the tree, ensuring its health and protecting it from forces that might disrupt cosmic harmony. The symbolism suggests that ancient Mesopotamians understood the universe as an interconnected system where divine beings actively maintain the connections between different levels of reality. Without Anunnaki intervention, the cosmic order itself might collapse. This concept of a divine axis would influence religious and philosophical traditions throughout the ancient world, appearing in various forms in Egyptian, Persian, Greek, and other cultural contexts. 32. The sacred fertilization ritual. Among the most intriguing and mysterious images in Mesopotamian art are the winged figures carrying small buckets and cone-shaped objects that resemble pine cones. These figures appear repeatedly in palace and temple decorations, always engaged in the same ritual activity, fertilizing the sacred tree of life. The bucket and cone imagery wasn't random artistic decoration, but depicted a specific religious ceremony that was central to Anunnaki worship. The figures are shown dipping their cone-shaped objects into the buckets, and then touching or sprinkling the sacred tree, as if transferring some life-giving substance. Modern scholars believe this represents a divine blessing ritual where supernatural beings transferred fertility and divine power to ensure the continued health of the cosmic order. The ceremony may have had earthly parallels where human priests performed similar rituals to maintain temple gardens or sacred groves. The pinecone objects may have been actual botanical items chosen for their symbolic associations with fertility and regeneration, or they might represent stylized depictions of divine organs or tools that don't correspond to any earthly objects. The consistency of these images across different time periods and geographical locations suggests that the fertilization ritual was a fundamental aspect of Anunnaki worship, so important that it needed to be permanently depicted in the most sacred artistic contexts. The imagery raises fascinating questions about how ancient peoples understood the relationship between divine action and natural fertility. 33. The Metropolitan's Divine Gallery. Within the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, visitors can encounter one of the most spectacular examples of Anunnaki artistic representation. Relief panels from the Palace of Ashurnasirpal II that combine stunning visual artistry with detailed cuneiform inscriptions. These massive stone panels, standing over 8 feet tall, show supernatural protective figures performing elaborate rituals in the presence of the sacred tree of life. Every detail of their appearance, their clothing, posture, and ritual implements was carefully planned to communicate specific theological concepts. What makes these panels extraordinary is the integration of visual and textual information. The cuneiform inscriptions don't just provide general religious formulas, but specifically identify individual Anunnaki deities and describe their particular roles in the ceremonies being depicted. The reliefs function as religious textbooks carved in stone, providing both visual examples of proper divine interaction and written instructions for understanding the complex relationships between different Anunnaki deities. Modern museum visitors often report feeling overwhelmed by the power and presence these ancient artworks continue to project. The figures seem to move and breathe, their eyes following observers with an intensity that suggests the artists successfully captured something of the divine presence they were attempting to represent. The panels remind us that Anunnaki worship wasn't abstract theology, but vivid, immediate religious experience designed to bring humans into direct contact with divine power. 34. Legal documents under divine protection. Scattered across museum collections worldwide are artifacts that reveal one of the most ingenious systems of legal protection ever devised: Kuduru boundary stones that combine practical property law with supernatural enforcement mechanisms. These stones, dating from around 1100 BCE, functioned as legal documents that established property boundaries, recorded land grants, and documented important business transactions. But they weren't simply earthly contracts. They were legal agreements enforced by the Anunnaki themselves. Each Kuduru displayed symbols representing specific Anunnaki deities who had agreed to protect the legal arrangement. Anyone who violated the terms of the contract wasn't just breaking human law, but defying divine authority, subjecting themselves to supernatural punishment. The divine curse formulas inscribed on these stones are remarkably specific and terrifying. They invoke particular Anunnaki deities to inflict precise punishments on contract violators, crop failures, disease, military defeat, or even the complete destruction of family lines. This system created a form of legal enforcement that extended far beyond human courts and police power. Even if earthly authorities couldn't catch and punish wrongdoers, the Anunnaki would ensure that divine justice was served. The psychological effect was profound. In cultures where people genuinely believed in Anunnaki power, these divine contract guarantees made legal agreements far more reliable than any purely human enforcement mechanism could provide. 35. The Bada Collection's Narrative Treasures. Room 56 of the British Museum houses an extraordinary collection of over 37 monumental bas-reliefs discovered by French archaeologist Paul-Émile Bada during his pioneering excavations in the mid-19th century. These massive stone panels present Anunnaki deities in complex narrative scenes that span centuries of religious development. Bada's discoveries were among the first major Mesopotamian archaeological finds to reach European museums, introducing the Western world to the sophisticated artistic traditions of ancient Assyria and Babylonia. The reliefs show Anunnaki deities engaged in cosmic battles, divine ceremonies, and supernatural interventions in human affairs. What makes these panels particularly valuable is their narrative complexity. Rather than showing isolated divine figures, they present elaborate stories with multiple characters, sequential action, and detailed settings that provide context for understanding Anunnaki mythology. The artistic quality is breathtaking. Ancient sculptors captured not just the physical appearance of divine beings, but their emotional states, relationships with each other, and the cosmic significance of their actions. Each panel functions like a frame in an enormous comic book that tells the story of divine involvement in human civilization. The sequence of panels creates an epic narrative spanning generations of divine and human interaction. Modern visitors can spend hours examining the intricate details carved into these stones, discovering new elements of the story with each viewing and gaining deeper appreciation for the sophisticated theological concepts they represent. 36. The Misunderstood Cosmic Map. In the world of alternative archaeology, few artifacts have generated more speculation than cylinder seal VA-243, housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin. Alternative theorists have claimed this ancient artifact depicts our solar system with a mysterious additional planet, but academic analysis reveals a very different reality. The seal shows what appears to be a central figure surrounded by circular objects, which some have interpreted as the sun surrounded by planets, including Earth's moon and a supposed extraplanet called Nibiru. However, detailed examination by Assyriologists, scholars who specialize in ancient Mesopotamian languages and culture, demonstrates that the seal actually depicts standard Mesopotamian religious iconography that appears in hundreds of similar artifacts. The central figure represents a divine being, probably one of the Anunnaki, surrounded by sacred symbols rather than astronomical objects. The circular elements are religious emblems that had specific theological meanings in ancient Mesopotamian worship practices. This misinterpretation illustrates the challenge of understanding ancient art without proper cultural and linguistic context. Modern viewers, influenced by contemporary scientific knowledge about our solar system, may see astronomical meaning where ancient artists intended purely religious symbolism. The controversy surrounding VA-243 demonstrates how easy it is to project modern concepts onto ancient artifacts, and why scholarly expertise in ancient languages and cultures remains essential for accurate interpretation of archaeological discoveries. 37. Symbols of eternal authority. Throughout over 2,000 years of Mesopotamian art, one symbolic combination appears with remarkable consistency: the rod and ring held by Anunnaki deities as emblems of their divine authority and cosmic justice. These weren't arbitrary artistic elements, but carefully chosen symbols that carried deep theological meaning. The rod represented the power to measure and define cosmic order, while the ring symbolized the eternal, unbreakable nature of divine law. When Anunnaki deities are shown holding these symbols, they're demonstrating their role as cosmic legislators whose decisions create the fundamental rules governing all existence. The rod measures out justice, while the ring ensures that divine verdicts remain permanent and unchangeable. The influence of this symbolism extended far beyond Mesopotamian borders. Similar rod and ring combinations appear in Egyptian royal regalia, Persian court ceremonies, and even medieval European coronation rituals, suggesting that the concept of divine authority symbols spread throughout the ancient world. Archaeological evidence shows these symbols being passed from one divine figure to another in scenes depicting the transfer of cosmic authority. When human kings received rod and ring symbols from Anunnaki deities, it represented the moment when divine power was delegated to earthly rulers. The persistence of these symbols across millennia demonstrates the enduring power of visual communication in religious contexts, creating instantly recognizable emblems of divine authority that transcended linguistic and cultural boundaries. 38. Divine fashion and wealth. Artistic depictions of Anunnaki deities reveal sophisticated attention to divine fashion that communicated theological concepts through elaborate clothing and ornamentation. These weren't simple artistic choices, but carefully designed visual statements about divine power and cosmic status. Anunnaki deities consistently appear wearing distinctive bearded faces that symbolized wisdom and maturity, even when depicting goddesses. The beards weren't biological features, but divine attributes that represented the accumulation of cosmic knowledge across vast spans of time. Their clothing featured elaborate gold and silver ornaments that caught and reflected light, creating visual effects that suggested the divine radiance called melem. Ancient artists used metallic inlays and carefully polished stone surfaces to make divine figures literally shimmer with supernatural light. The wealth displayed in divine clothing served important theological purposes. It demonstrated that the Anunnaki commanded resources beyond human imagination, controlling treasures that made earthly royal riches seem insignificant by comparison. Color symbolism played crucial roles in divine fashion. Deep blues connected deities to the cosmic waters and infinite sky, while gold represented their association with solar power and eternal brilliance. The consistent attention to divine fashion across different artistic traditions suggests that ancient peoples believed the Anunnaki's appearance was as important as their actions, with every visual detail carrying theological significance that informed worshippers about divine nature and cosmic hierarchy. 39. Art mirrors civilization. The evolution of Anunnaki artistic representation provides a unique window into the development of Mesopotamian civilization itself, showing how divine imagery became more sophisticated as human culture grew in complexity and technical capability. Early Anunnaki depictions used simple geometric forms and basic symbolic elements. Divine figures appeared as stylized representations with minimal detail, focusing on essential, identifying characteristics rather than artistic sophistication. As Mesopotamian cities grew larger and more powerful, Anunnaki imagery became correspondingly elaborate. Artists developed techniques for showing depth, emotion, and complex interactions between multiple divine figures engaged in cosmic narratives. The progression parallels advances in metallurgy, architecture, and written communication. As human technology improved, artists gained access to better tools and materials that allowed more detailed and impressive divine representations. The most sophisticated Anunnaki artwork appears during periods of greatest political and economic prosperity, suggesting that divine art served as both religious expression and cultural prestige display. Wealthy cities competed to create the most magnificent divine imagery. This artistic evolution also reflects changing theological understanding. Simple geometric Anunnaki gave way to complex divine personalities with individual characteristics, emotions, and relationships, showing how religious concepts themselves became more nuanced over time. The parallel development of art and civilization suggests that Anunnaki imagery served as both mirror and inspiration for human cultural advancement. 40. The divine identification system. Ancient Mesopotamian artists faced a unique challenge: how to create visual representations that would allow viewers to immediately identify specific Anunnaki deities among a pantheon of 600 divine beings. Their solution was a sophisticated iconographic system that functioned like a divine identification manual. Each major Anunnaki deity possessed standardized visual attributes that appeared consistently across different artistic media and time periods. Enlil always appeared with his characteristic horned crown and symbols of cosmic authority, while Inanna could be recognized by her association with lions and the eight-pointed star. These iconographic conventions weren't simple artistic traditions, but essential religious tools. In a largely illiterate society, visual identification allowed worshippers to recognize and properly approach specific deities without needing to read accompanying text. The system included clothing styles, accompanying animals, symbolic objects, and even characteristic poses that were unique to individual divine figures. Master artists trained apprentices in these conventions, ensuring consistent representation across generations. The standardization was so successful that modern scholars can identify Anunnaki deities in damaged or fragmentary artworks by recognizing just a few characteristic elements. This visual consistency created a form of divine branding that made Anunnaki deities immediately recognizable throughout the ancient Near East. The sophistication of this identification system demonstrates the advanced level of artistic and religious organization that characterized Mesopotamian civilization at its height. 41. Judges of the River of Death. In the shadowy depths of the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest surviving masterpiece of literature, lies a chilling description of the Anunnaki's role in determining the ultimate fate of human souls. These divine beings served as cosmic judges who decided whether the dead could cross the mysterious river that separated life from death. The River of Death wasn't simply a geographical feature, but a spiritual boundary that souls had to navigate under divine scrutiny. The Anunnaki judges examined each soul's earthly life, weighing actions, intentions, and a complex web of relationships that had defined their mortal existence. Their judgment wasn't arbitrary, but but followed cosmic laws that balanced individual behavior against universal principles of justice and order. Some souls received permission to cross into peaceful afterlife realms, while others faced punishment or transformation based on their earthly deeds. This concept of post-mortem divine judgment would become one of the most influential religious ideas in human history, appearing in various forms throughout Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. The image of divine beings carefully evaluating human lives established one of our earliest concepts of moral accountability that extended beyond physical death into eternal spiritual consequences. 42. Divine democracy in action. The Enuma Elish presents one of history's most fascinating examples of divine governance. The moment when the Anunnaki collectively witness Marduk's victory over the chaos goddess Tiamat, and then acclaim him as their supreme ruler through what can only be described as divine democracy. This wasn't a simple military conquest followed by imposed rule, but a cosmic political process where divine beings participated in selecting their own leadership through collective agreement and acclamation. After Marduk's triumph over the forces of chaos, the assembled Anunnaki engaged in formal deliberation about the cosmic order that should follow. They examined Marduk's qualifications, discussed his demonstrated powers, and ultimately voted to grant him supreme authority over their divine assembly. The process established important precedents for both divine and human governance. It showed that even among gods, legitimate authority required consent from the governed rather than mere force or inheritance. This divine, democratic model influenced human political theory, suggesting that earthly rulers should also seek consensus and approval from their subjects rather than ruling through fear alone. The concept of divine democracy also implied that cosmic order itself was maintained through rational deliberation and collective decision-making rather than arbitrary divine whim, creating a universe governed by law rather than caprice. 43. Even goddesses face divine law. The haunting poem known as The Descent of Inanna reveals one of the most shocking aspects of Anunnaki governance. Even the most powerful divine beings remain subject to cosmic law and divine judgment. When the mighty goddess Inanna descended to the underworld, she too faced scrutiny from the 7 Anunnaki judges. Inanna wasn't a minor deity, but one of the most powerful and feared figures in the Mesopotamian pantheon, commanding worship throughout the ancient Near East and wielding authority over both love and war. Yet when she entered the realm of the dead, her cosmic status provided no exemption from divine justice. The 7 Anunnaki judges examined her actions, questioned her motives for entering their domain, and ultimately rendered judgment that temporarily resulted in her death. This story established a crucial theological principle. Divine law applied universally, without exception for rank, power, or personal relationships. Not even gods could escape accountability for their actions. The universality of divine justice served important social functions, providing reassurance that cosmic order would ultimately prevail regardless of how powerful wrongdoers might appear to be. The image of Inanna facing judgment also demonstrated that the Anunnaki judicial system operated according to established principles rather than personal favoritism or arbitrary decision-making. 44. The Annual Divine Assembly. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe one of the most significant events in the cosmic calendar. Annual assemblies where the Anunnaki gathered to decree the fates of mankind for the coming year. These weren't casual divine meetings, but formal governmental sessions that determined the course of human history. The assemblies followed established protocols and procedures that paralleled earthly royal courts. Specific Anunnaki deities presented reports on their areas of responsibility, while others raised concerns about human behavior or cosmic disturbances that required divine intervention. The fate-decreeing process involved careful deliberation about which human individuals, families, cities, and nations would prosper or suffer during the coming year. These decisions weren't random, but based on complex calculations involving human behavior, cosmic balance, and divine justice. The annual nature of these assemblies meant that human destiny was regularly reviewed and potentially revised. Good behavior might earn divine favor that could reverse previous negative judgments, while continued wrongdoing could result in escalating punishments. Knowledge of these divine assemblies influenced human behavior throughout the year, as people understood that their actions were being observed and would be formally evaluated during the next divine session. The concept of regular divine judgment created a cycle of accountability that kept cosmic order functioning through systematic review and adjustment of universal policies. 45. The First Divine Labor Strike. The Atrahasis epic preserves what may be history's most extraordinary labor dispute, a rebellion by divine workers that led to the first recorded strike in literature. This cosmic work stoppage involved the Ijiji gods, who had been assigned the demanding physical labor of maintaining the universe under Anunnaki supervision. For what the text suggests were countless eons, the Ijiji performed their duties without complaint, digging rivers, building mountains, and maintaining the cosmic infrastructure that kept the universe functioning properly. But eventually, the working conditions and endless labor demands became unbearable. In scenes that read remarkably like modern labor organizing, the Ijiji gods threw down their tools, burned their work equipment, and marched en masse to the residences of the Anunnaki leadership. Their protest wasn't chaotic violence, but organized collective action designed to force management to address legitimate workplace grievances. They demanded better working conditions, reasonable hours, and relief from the most burdensome aspects of cosmic maintenance. The strike created a crisis in divine governance that threatened the stability of the entire universe. Without Ijiji labor, essential cosmic functions began to break down, forcing the Anunnaki to find alternative solutions to maintain universal order. The resolution, creating humanity to take over divine labor, represents one of the most creative solutions to a labor dispute in any literature. 46. Divine disagreement over human survival. Mesopotamian flood narratives present one of the most dramatic theological conflicts in ancient literature, a fundamental disagreement between Anunnaki deities about whether humanity deserved to survive or should be completely destroyed. Enlil, the supreme authority among the Anunnaki, had decided that humans had become too numerous, too noisy, and too disruptive to cosmic order. His solution was radical: unleash a great flood that would eliminate humanity entirely and restore peace to the divine realm. But Enki, the wise god of water and knowledge, disagreed with this extreme measure. He believed that complete human extinction was unjust and that at least some representatives of humanity should be preserved to continue the species. This divine conflict wasn't simply a disagreement about policy, but a fundamental theological debate about justice, mercy, and the relationship between gods and mortals. It reflected competing views about whether humans were irredeemably flawed or capable of improvement. Enki's decision to secretly warn the human hero Utnapishtim about the coming flood represented divine, civil disobedience. One god deliberately undermining another's decision to save innocent lives. The story established important precedents about divine mercy, suggesting that even when cosmic justice demanded punishment, divine wisdom might find ways to preserve hope for the future. This theological tension between justice and mercy would become central to many later religious traditions. 47. The foundation of political legitimacy. For over 3,000 years, from the earliest Sumerian city-states through the fall of the Babylonian Empire, one principle remained constant in Mesopotamian political theory: legitimate kingship required approval from the Anunnaki deities. This wasn't simply religious window dressing added to existing political arrangements, but the fundamental basis upon which all governmental authority rested. Kings couldn't simply claim power through military conquest or hereditary inheritance. They needed to demonstrate divine sanction for their rule. The requirement for Anunnaki approval created elaborate coronation ceremonies where new rulers formally received divine blessing through complex religious rituals performed by specialized priesthoods. Royal inscriptions consistently emphasized the ruler's relationship with specific Anunnaki deities, describing how divine beings had personally selected and empowered the king to govern their earthly territories. This system created powerful psychological and political effects. Subjects who might resist purely human authority hesitated to oppose rulers blessed by the gods, while kings themselves felt accountable to divine standards of justice and governance. The concept of divine political legitimacy spread throughout the ancient world, influencing Egyptian pharaonic ideology, Persian royal theory, and eventually European concepts of divine right monarchy. Even today, many political systems retain ceremonial elements that echo these ancient ideas about the relationship between divine approval and earthly authority. 48. Sacred marriage as political theater. Among the most fascinating religious ceremonies in ancient Mesopotamia were seasonal festivals featuring ritual, sacred marriages between Anunnaki deities and their human representatives, creating spectacular events that blended religious devotion with sophisticated political theater. These weren't simple symbolic ceremonies, but elaborate productions involving entire communities in cosmic dramas that reinforced social order and divine authority. The festivals typically featured kings or high priests representing male deities, while priestesses embodied goddesses, in carefully choreographed ceremonies that reenacted divine unions believed to ensure cosmic fertility and stability. The sacred marriage rituals served multiple functions simultaneously. They guaranteed divine blessing for agricultural cycles, reinforced the king's connection to divine power, and provided community-wide religious experiences that strengthened social cohesion. The ceremonies involved months of preparation, including elaborate costume creation, musical composition, architectural decoration, and coordination of participants from across the kingdom. The political implications were profound. By personally representing Anunnaki deities in these sacred unions, rulers demonstrated their intimate connection to divine power while simultaneously subjecting themselves to religious oversight and community witness. The festivals also created opportunities for subjects to observe their rulers in vulnerable, human moments that balanced displays of divine authority with reminders of mortal limitations. These sacred marriage celebrations influenced religious and political ceremonies throughout the ancient world. 49. Royal humiliation before divine power. The New Year festival, Akitu, in Babylon featured one of the most psychologically complex religious ceremonies in the ancient world. A ritual humiliation of the king before Marduk's statue that demonstrated the absolute supremacy of divine authority over earthly power. This wasn't accidental degradation, but carefully orchestrated theater designed to reinforce cosmic hierarchy and divine sovereignty over human institutions. During the ceremony, the king was stripped of his royal regalia and forced to kneel before Marduk's statue, while a priest struck him across the face and pulled his ears until tears flowed from his eyes. The humiliation continued as the king was required to recite declarations of his unworthiness and dependence on divine mercy for his continued rule. Only after this complete submission could the king receive his royal symbols back, symbolically demonstrating that all earthly authority derived from divine grace rather than human achievement. The psychological impact was profound both for rulers and subjects. Kings were reminded that their power remained contingent on divine approval, while subjects witnessed their seemingly all-powerful rulers reduced to trembling supplicants before divine authority. The ceremony created annual cycles of political renewal where royal authority was symbolically destroyed and recreated under divine supervision, preventing the accumulation of unchecked earthly power. This ritual demonstration of divine supremacy influenced coronation and renewal ceremonies throughout the ancient world and beyond. 50. Divine emotions and human relatability. Ancient Mesopotamian texts consistently describe the Anunnaki as possessing remarkably human-like emotions, including jealousy, anger, favoritism, love, grief, and even moments of doubt or uncertainty. This emotional complexity made them far more relatable than later religious traditions that emphasized divine perfection and emotional detachment. The gods weren't portrayed as serene, unchanging beings beyond human understanding, but as powerful personalities whose emotional responses could be predicted, influenced, and sometimes even manipulated through proper religious approaches. Enlil's anger could be triggered by human noise and disrespect, while his favor could be earned through appropriate worship and moral behavior. Inanna's jealousy drove complex divine relationships, and Enki's compassion led him to protect humanity against other gods' harsh judgments. This emotional accessibility created possibilities for genuine relationships between humans and deities. Worshippers could understand divine motivations, predict divine reactions, and develop personal connections based on shared emotional experiences. The human-like emotions also made divine justice more comprehensible. When gods punished wrongdoing, it reflected understandable anger rather than incomprehensible cosmic forces, while divine mercy emerged from recognizable compassion. This emotional complexity influenced how ancient peoples understood morality, justice, and the nature of divine human relationships, creating theological frameworks that emphasized personal connection rather than fearful submission to incomprehensible power. 51. The Great Divine Evolution. One of the most remarkable aspects of Anunnaki worship is how these deities evolved and transformed over the millennia, changing from supreme heavenly rulers in early Sumerian religion to primarily underworld judges in later Babylonian traditions. This transformation wasn't accidental, but reflected broader changes in Mesopotamian civilization, political structures, and theological understanding that developed over thousands of years of continuous cultural evolution. In early Sumerian periods, the Anunnaki ruled from heaven and actively governed earthly affairs through direct intervention in human activities. They lived among the stars, commanded cosmic forces, and regularly communicated with human rulers through dreams, omens, and prophetic visions. As Mesopotamian religion became more systematized and hierarchical, newer deities like Marduk and Ashur rose to prominence, gradually assuming many functions that had previously belonged to the Anunnaki. Rather than disappearing, the Anunnaki migrated to new roles as judges and administrators in the underworld, where they maintained their authority over life, death, and cosmic justice while yielding earthly governance to newer divine powers. This evolution demonstrates the flexibility and adaptability of ancient religious systems, showing how theological concepts could be modified and reinterpreted to accommodate changing cultural needs and political realities. The transformation also reveals how ancient peoples understood divine beings as dynamic entities capable of growth and change rather than static concepts frozen in eternal sameness. 52. Divine name changes and cultural adaptation. The Akkadian adoption of Sumerian religious traditions involved one of history's most systematic campaigns of divine rebranding, with Anunnaki deities receiving new names while retaining their essential mythological functions and cosmic authorities. This wasn't simple translation, but careful cultural adaptation that preserved religious continuity while accommodating linguistic and cultural differences between Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations. Inanna became Ishtar, Enki transformed into Ea, and numerous other Anunnaki received Akkadian names that often emphasized different aspects of their personalities or powers while maintaining their core theological roles. The name changes reflected deeper cultural shifts in how divine beings were understood and approached. Akkadian versions sometimes emphasized different characteristics or relationships that better fit Akkadian social structures and religious priorities. Despite the name changes, mythological narratives remained remarkably consistent, suggesting that the essential functions and personalities of these deities transcended linguistic boundaries and cultural differences. The systematic nature of these transformations demonstrates sophisticated theological planning that ensured religious continuity across major cultural transitions. This pattern of divine adaptation would be repeated throughout ancient history as religious traditions spread across cultural boundaries, showing how divine concepts could maintain essential characteristics while adapting to local needs and preferences. The success of this adaptation process contributed to the remarkable longevity and geographic spread of Mesopotamian religious influences. 53. Political power reshapes divine hierarchy. The rise of Babylon as the dominant power in Mesopotamia created one of history's most dramatic examples of how political changes can fundamentally reshape religious hierarchies and divine authority structures. As Babylon grew from a minor city-state to the capital of a vast empire, its patron deity, Marduk, underwent a corresponding transformation from local god to supreme ruler of the entire divine pantheon. This elevation wasn't simply ceremonial, but involved systematic theological restructuring that absorbed the powers and authorities of multiple Anunnaki deities into Marduk's expanded divine portfolio. The process required sophisticated religious scholarship that created new mythologies explaining how Marduk had legitimately acquired these additional powers while maintaining respect for the ancient Anunnaki traditions. Rather than completely displacing the older deities, Babylonian theologians developed complex hierarchical systems that positioned traditional Anunnaki as subordinate officials serving under Marduk's supreme authority. This theological restructuring served important political functions, providing religious justification for Babylonian imperial expansion and creating unified divine authority that matched centralized earthly government. The success of this religious reorganization demonstrated how adaptable ancient religious systems could be when political circumstances required major theological adjustments. The pattern would be repeated throughout history as political changes necessitated corresponding religious adaptations to maintain harmony between earthly and divine authority structures. 54. Divine authority legitimizes imperial power. Assyrian royal ideology represented one of the most sophisticated examples of using ancient religious authority to legitimize contemporary political power, incorporating Anunnaki deities into palace decoration and royal inscriptions with unprecedented systematic thoroughness. Assyrian kings weren't content to simply claim divine approval, but created comprehensive visual and textual programs that surrounded themselves with constant reminders of their connection to ancient divine authorities. Palace walls featured elaborate reliefs showing Assyrian rulers receiving blessing directly from Anunnaki deities, while royal inscriptions described detailed divine communications that authorized imperial expansion and conquest. The integration of ancient religious symbols with contemporary political messaging created powerful propaganda that presented Assyrian imperialism as fulfillment of divine will rather than mere human ambition. This systematic use of religious authority served multiple audiences. It reassured Assyrian subjects about the legitimacy of their rulers while intimidating conquered peoples with demonstrations of divine sanction. The visual programs were carefully designed to communicate divine approval even to illiterate populations through standardized iconographic elements that immediately conveyed royal divine connection. The sophistication of Assyrian religious political integration influenced imperial ideologies throughout the ancient world, establishing patterns of divine legitimization that would be adopted by Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. Modern archaeological analysis continues to reveal the depth and complexity of these royal religious programs that successfully maintained imperial authority for several centuries. 55. The gradual twilight of ancient gods. The Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE marked the beginning of the end for traditional Anunnaki worship, initiating a gradual decline that would eventually lead to the disappearance of these ancient deities from active religious practice. Unlike previous conquests that had typically resulted in religious syncretism and adaptation, Persian rule introduced fundamentally different theological concepts that were less compatible with traditional Mesopotamian divine hierarchies. Persian religious traditions, influenced by Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic dualism and monotheistic tendencies, provided alternative frameworks for understanding divine authority that gradually displaced traditional Anunnaki worship. The decline wasn't immediate or complete. Archaeological evidence shows that some Anunnaki traditions persisted for centuries under Persian rule, particularly in rural areas and conservative religious communities that maintained older practices. But the institutional support that had sustained elaborate Anunnaki temple complexes and priesthoods gradually diminished as Persian administrators redirected resources toward religious systems more compatible with imperial ideology. The process accelerated under Greek rule following Alexander's conquests, as Hellenistic cultural influences introduced entirely different divine concepts that further marginalized traditional Mesopotamian religious practices. Some Anunnaki traditions survived into the Hellenistic period by adapting to Greek religious frameworks, but these represented cultural preservation rather than living religious practice. The gradual disappearance of Anunnaki worship marked the end of one of history's longest-running religious traditions. 56. Regional divine variations. Across the diverse landscape of ancient Mesopotamia, different city-states developed distinct regional variations in how they understood and worshipped the Anunnaki, creating a complex religious mosaic that reflected local cultural priorities and historical experiences. Rather than maintaining uniform divine concepts across all territories, individual cities emphasized different aspects of the same deities based on local needs, geographical conditions, and cultural traditions. Coastal cities naturally emphasized Anunnaki deities associated with water and maritime activities, while agricultural communities focused on gods connected to farming, irrigation, and seasonal cycles. Cities that serve as major trade centers developed elaborate theological frameworks around Anunnaki deities who governed commerce, travel, and cross-cultural communication. These regional variations weren't contradictory, but complementary, creating a rich tapestry of divine understanding that allowed the same fundamental deities to serve diverse community needs. The flexibility of Anunnaki worship enabled it to adapt to local conditions while maintaining overall theological coherence across the broader Mesopotamian cultural sphere. Archaeological evidence from different cities reveals distinct artistic styles, ritual practices, and mythological emphases that reflected these regional adaptations of common divine themes. This regional diversity contributed to the longevity and geographic spread of Anunnaki worship by allowing local communities to develop personally meaningful relationships with ancient divine traditions. The pattern demonstrates how successful religious systems accommodate local variation while maintaining core theological principles. 57. The Great Theological Standardization. During the Neo-Assyrian period, Mesopotamian religious scholars undertook one of history's most ambitious theological projects, the systematic standardization of Anunnaki mythology that created the versions most familiar to modern researchers. This wasn't simply academic scholarship, but a deliberate attempt to create unified religious understanding that could support imperial administration across diverse cultural territories. Teams of scribes and religious experts collected, compared, and reconciled different regional versions of Anunnaki myths, creating authoritative texts that established standard divine narratives for imperial use. The standardization process involved careful theological decision-making about which versions of conflicting myths should be considered authoritative and how contradictory traditions could be harmonized. The resulting standardized mythology represented centuries of theological development, incorporating elements from different time periods and regions into comprehensive narrative frameworks. These standardized versions became the basis for later Babylonian religious literature and the primary sources from which modern scholars reconstruct ancient Mesopotamian religious beliefs. The success of this standardization project demonstrates the sophisticated level of religious scholarship and institutional organization that characterized late Mesopotamian civilization. The standardized myths also serve important political functions, creating unified religious understanding that supported imperial unity and administrative efficiency. Modern understanding of Anunnaki mythology is largely based on these standardized Neo-Assyrian versions rather than the diverse regional traditions that preceded them. 58. Cross-cultural divine identification. The religious traditions of neighboring Hurrian and Hittite cultures provide fascinating evidence of cross-cultural religious influence through their identification of the Anunnaki with their own indigenous concepts of former gods who had been banished to the underworld. These non-Mesopotamian cultures didn't simply adopt Anunnaki worship wholesale, but integrated these foreign divine concepts into their existing religious frameworks through sophisticated theological interpretation. Hurrian and Hittite mythologies already included traditions about ancient deities who had ruled during earlier cosmic ages before being displaced by newer divine generations. When these cultures encountered Mesopotamian Anunnaki traditions, they recognized similarities between these foreign gods and their own displaced ancient deities, leading to religious syncretism that enriched both traditions. This cross-cultural identification process reveals how religious ideas spread and adapted across cultural boundaries in the ancient world, creating networks of shared divine concepts that transcended political and linguistic divisions. The success of this religious integration demonstrates the flexibility and adaptability of ancient religious systems that could accommodate foreign divine concepts while maintaining cultural distinctiveness. Archaeological evidence from Hurrian and Hittite sites shows artistic and textual materials that blend indigenous religious traditions with adapted Anunnaki concepts in creative and sophisticated ways. This pattern of cross-cultural religious adaptation became a recurring feature of ancient Near Eastern history as different civilizations encountered and influenced each other's theological development. 59. The language of divine understanding. The gradual shift from Sumerian to Akkadian as the primary liturgical language of Mesopotamian religion fundamentally changed how Anunnaki deities were understood, worshipped, and conceptualized by successive generations of believers. Language isn't simply a tool for communication, but shapes how concepts are understood and relationships are conceived, making this linguistic transition a profound theological transformation. Sumerian religious vocabulary contained nuances and associations that couldn't be perfectly translated into Akkadian, leading to subtle but significant changes in how divine concepts were expressed and understood. The shift also reflected broader cultural changes as Akkadian-speaking populations became dominant in Mesopotamian urban centers, bringing their own cultural perspectives to ancient Sumerian religious traditions. Akkadian liturgical texts preserved Sumerian divine names and ritual formulas, while adapting theological concepts to fit Akkadian grammatical structures and cultural assumptions. This linguistic adaptation process created opportunities for theological innovation as religious scholars worked to express ancient concepts in new linguistic frameworks. The bilingual nature of late Mesopotamian religious scholarship, with scholars maintaining knowledge of both Sumerian and Akkadian religious vocabulary, created rich interpretive traditions that enhanced theological understanding. Modern scholars studying Anunnaki worship must navigate these linguistic layers to understand how divine concepts evolve through translation and cultural adaptation processes. The language transition pattern would be repeated throughout religious history as spiritual traditions spread across linguistic boundaries. 60. Archaeological layers of divine devotion. Archaeological evidence from Anunnaki temple sites reveals one of the most remarkable patterns in religious history: continuous reuse and rebuilding over millennia, with new sacred structures built directly on top of older ones in endless cycles of architectural devotion. This wasn't simply practical reuse of convenient locations, but reflected deep theological beliefs about the sanctity of specific geographical sites that have been blessed by divine presence. Excavations at major temple sites reveal archaeological layers spanning thousands of years, with each generation adding new construction while carefully preserving elements from previous religious structures. The practice created sacred artificial mountains composed of accumulated religious architecture that physically elevated newer temples above the surrounding landscape. These archaeological layers function like historical documents written in stone and clay, preserving evidence of changing architectural styles, ritual practices, and theological emphases across vast spans of time. The continuous rebuilding demonstrates the remarkable persistence of Anunnaki worship traditions that maintain sacred sites through political upheavals, cultural changes, and religious innovations. Modern archaeological techniques allow scholars to excavate these layered sites with unprecedented precision, revealing detailed information about how religious practices evolved while maintaining fundamental continuity. The temple layers also provide evidence of economic investment in religious infrastructure that demonstrates the central importance of Anunnaki worship in ancient Mesopotamian society. Each layer represents countless individual acts of devotion that collectively created monumental testaments to human religious dedication. 61. The father of Sumerian studies. In the halls of the University of Pennsylvania, one man's extraordinary dedication to ancient Mesopotamian civilization earned him the title Father of Sumerology and revolutionized our understanding of the Anunnaki and their world. Samuel Noah Kramer spent his career meticulously translating Sumerian texts, and his discoveries were nothing short of revolutionary. He identified over 30 documented firsts in human civilization that originated with Sumerian culture, many of which were directly connected to Anunnaki deities and their worship. Among these firsts were the earliest known schools, the first recorded legal codes, the oldest medical prescriptions, and the first written literature. Many of these achievements were attributed to divine inspiration from specific Anunnaki deities who had given knowledge to humanity. Kramer's work revealed that Anunnaki worship wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated religious practice that accompanied remarkable intellectual and cultural achievements. His translations of hymns, prayers, and mythological texts provided the foundation for modern understanding of how the Anunnaki functioned in daily religious life. The firsts he documented demonstrate that Anunnaki worship occurred alongside the development of fundamental human institutions, including writing, law, medicine, and education. Kramer's legacy continues to influence Mesopotamian studies, with his translations remaining authoritative sources for understanding ancient divine concepts and their role in early human civilization. 62. The digital revolution in ancient studies. The creation of the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature, EDC Cell, represented a revolutionary moment in Anunnaki research, making nearly 400 ancient Sumerian compositions accessible to scholars worldwide through digital humanities technology. Before this digital transformation, Anunnaki research required physical access to scattered museum collections and specialized libraries that housed fragmented manuscripts and unpublished translations. The EDC Cell project brought together decades of scholarly work, providing searchable, cross-referenced access to Sumerian texts that mention Anunnaki deities in contexts ranging from royal hymns to personal prayers. This digital accessibility democratized Anunnaki research, allowing scholars from around the world to access primary source materials that had previously been available only to a small number of specialists. The searchable nature of digital texts enabled new types of research, including statistical analysis of divine names, comparative studies of mythological variations, and systematic examination of theological development across time periods. The project also facilitated collaborative research, with scholars able to share findings and build upon each other's work in ways that weren't possible when research materials were scattered across different physical locations. The digital revolution in Sumerian studies continues to accelerate discovery and understanding of Anunnaki worship and its role in ancient Mesopotamian civilization. 63. The unread library of antiquity. In museum storage rooms and private collections around the world lies one of the greatest untapped sources of historical information ever assembled. Over 500,000 cuneiform tablets, most of which remain untranslated and potentially containing unknown references to the Anunnaki. This vast library represents thousands of years of human record-keeping from across the ancient Near East, including administrative documents, religious texts, personal letters, business contracts, and scholarly works. The scale of untranslated material is staggering. If scholars could read just one tablet per day, it would take over 1,300 years to complete the current backlog, and new discoveries continue to add to the collection faster than existing materials can be processed. Among these untranslated tablets are almost certainly references to Anunnaki deities in contexts we haven't yet discovered. Unknown myths, unrecorded rituals, and undocumented aspects of divine worship that could revolutionize our understanding. The challenge of translation isn't simply a matter of time, but requires specialized expertise in ancient languages, cultural contexts, and religious symbolism that takes decades to develop. Each newly translated tablet has the potential to provide fresh insights into Anunnaki worship, divine hierarchies, and the role of these deities in ancient daily life. The untranslated tablets represent one of archaeology's greatest opportunities and challenges for understanding ancient divine concepts. 64. The Definitive Dictionary Project. For 90 years, from 1921 to 2011, teams of scholars at the University of Chicago worked on one of the most ambitious linguistic projects in history, the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, which provided definitive translations that systematically refuted many popular misinterpretations of Anunnaki texts. This wasn't simply a translation dictionary, but a comprehensive cultural and religious encyclopedia that documented how ancient Mesopotamian words were used in different contexts across thousands of years. The project involved analyzing hundreds of thousands of cuneiform texts to understand the precise meanings of individual words, phrases, and concepts related to Anunnaki worship and Mesopotamian religion. The dictionary's rigorous methodology required multiple scholars to verify each translation, ensuring accuracy through collaborative scholarship and peer review processes that eliminated personal biases and interpretive errors. The completed dictionary systematically demolishes many popular misconceptions about Anunnaki deities that have been based on incomplete or inaccurate translations of key terms and concepts. Academic scholars worldwide now use the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary as the authoritative source for understanding ancient Mesopotamian religious vocabulary and theological concepts. The project's completion marked a watershed moment in Anunnaki studies, providing tools that enable more accurate and nuanced understanding of these ancient deities and their worship. The dictionary continues to serve as the foundation for contemporary scholarship on Mesopotamian religion and divine concepts. 65. Artificial intelligence meets ancient wisdom. Recent advances in artificial intelligence technology have revolutionized Anunnaki research by enabling computer-assisted translation projects that can identify previously unknown references to these ancient deities in damaged or fragmentary cuneiform tablets. Traditional translation methods required scholars to manually examine each tablet, a time-consuming process that often left severely damaged texts unreadable and potentially valuable information lost forever. AI-assisted translation systems can analyze partial letter forms, predict missing words based on context, and identify patterns across thousands of texts that would be impossible for human scholars to process manually. These technological tools have already identified previously unknown Anunnaki references in tablets that have been sitting in museum collections for decades, considered too damaged for traditional translation methods. The AI systems can also detect subtle variations in how divine names were written across different time periods and regions, providing insights into how Anunnaki worship evolved and spread geographically. Computer analysis has revealed unexpected connections between texts from different sites and time periods, showing how Anunnaki traditions maintain consistency across vast spans of time and space. The acceleration of discovery through AI assistance is transforming the pace of Anunnaki research, with new findings emerging at unprecedented rates. This technological revolution promises to unlock vast amounts of information about ancient divine concepts that have been inaccessible for millennia. 66. The scholarly community's continued fascination. Academic conferences on Mesopotamian religion consistently feature dozens of research papers focused on Anunnaki-related topics, demonstrating the ongoing scholarly interest in these ancient deities among professional researchers worldwide. These conferences bring together experts in linguistics, archaeology, religious studies, and cultural history who continue to find new aspects of Anunnaki worship worthy of detailed investigation. Recent conference presentations have explored topics ranging from the astronomical knowledge embedded in Anunnaki myths to the economic implications of temple-based worship systems. The diversity of scholarly approaches demonstrates how Anunnaki studies intersect with multiple academic disciplines, creating opportunities for interdisciplinary research that enriches understanding from various perspectives. International collaboration among scholars has led to major research projects that combine expertise from different countries and institutions, pooling resources to tackle complex questions about ancient divine concepts. The sustained academic interest reflects the recognition that Anunnaki worship represents one of the most sophisticated and influential religious systems in human history, worthy of continued intensive study. Graduate students continue to choose Anunnaki-related topics for dissertation research, ensuring that new generations of scholars will maintain and advance this field of study. The scholarly community's dedication to Anunnaki research demonstrates the enduring relevance of these ancient deities for understanding human religious and cultural development. 67. The rigorous process of ancient translation. Behind every published translation of Anunnaki texts lies a rigorous peer review process involving multiple specialists in ancient linguistics, archaeology, and religious studies who work together to ensure translation accuracy and prevent misinterpretation. This collaborative approach recognizes that ancient Mesopotamian texts often contain ambiguous passages that could be interpreted in multiple ways, requiring expert consensus to establish the most likely meanings. Peer review for Anunnaki research typically involves linguists who specialize in Sumerian and Akkadian grammar, archaeologists who understand material cultural contexts, and religious studies experts who can evaluate theological implications. The review process often requires months of careful analysis, with reviewers examining not just translation accuracy, but also cultural context, historical plausibility, and consistency with other known texts. Disputed translations may require extended scholarly debate, with multiple experts presenting arguments for different interpretive approaches before reaching consensus on the most accurate rendering. This rigorous methodology ensures that published Anunnaki translations meet the highest academic standards and can be trusted by other scholars and interested readers. The peer review system also helps prevent the publication of speculative or ideologically motivated interpretations that might distort understanding of ancient religious concepts. The collaborative nature of this scholarship demonstrates the international academic community's commitment to accurate understanding of Anunnaki worship and Mesopotamian civilization. 68. Academic programs for ancient divine studies. Leading universities worldwide offer specialized degree programs in Assyriology and Mesopotamian studies where Anunnaki research forms a significant component of the curriculum, training new generations of scholars to continue this important work. These academic programs require students to master multiple ancient languages, understand archaeological methodology, and develop expertise in ancient religious systems as part of comprehensive training in ancient Near Eastern studies. Students in these programs learn to read cuneiform script, understand ancient cultural contexts, and apply modern analytical methods to ancient religious texts and archaeological materials. Anunnaki studies within these programs typically involve examination of primary source texts, analysis of archaeological evidence, an investigation of how ancient divine concepts influence broader cultural development. The programs often require fieldwork experience, giving students hands-on exposure to archaeological excavation and artifact analysis in the regions where Anunnaki worship originated. Graduate students frequently focus their research on specific aspects of Anunnaki worship, contributing new scholarship through thesis and dissertation projects that advance understanding of these ancient deities. Faculty members in these programs include world-renowned experts whose research continues to shape international understanding of ancient Mesopotamian religion and divine concepts. The existence of these specialized academic programs ensures that Anunnaki research will continue to progress with new discoveries and interpretive approaches. 69. Preserving divine heritage for the future. Digital preservation initiatives currently underway aim to create comprehensive 3D models of Anunnaki artifacts and archaeological sites, ensuring their survival for future generations of researchers, even if original materials are damaged or destroyed. These preservation projects use advanced scanning technology to capture every detail of ancient artifacts, from microscopic surface textures to overall dimensional measurements. The digital models can be manipulated and analyzed in ways that aren't possible with physical artifacts, allowing researchers to examine details that might be missed through traditional study methods. Virtual reality applications enable scholars and students to experience reconstructed Anunnaki temple environments, providing immersive educational experiences that bring ancient religious spaces to life. The preservation initiatives also create backup copies of irreplaceable artifacts that could be lost through war, natural disasters, or environmental degradation that threatens museum collections worldwide. International collaboration on these preservation projects ensures that digital archives will be maintained by multiple institutions, reducing the risk of total loss. The preserved digital materials will enable future scholars to conduct research using technologies that haven't yet been invented, potentially revealing information that current analytical methods cannot detect. These preservation efforts represent a crucial investment in maintaining access to ancient divine heritage for scholarly research and public education. 70. The power of interdisciplinary collaboration. Modern Anunnaki research benefits tremendously from interdisciplinary approaches that combine expertise from archaeology, linguistics, anthropology, religious studies, and even computer science to provide comprehensive understanding of ancient divine concepts. No single academic discipline can fully address the complexity of ancient religious systems, making collaborative research essential for advancing understanding of Anunnaki worship and its cultural significance. Archaeological evidence provides material context for understanding how Anunnaki worship functioned in daily life, while linguistic analysis reveals the precise meanings of religious texts and divine concepts. Anthropological perspectives help scholars understand how ancient religious practices related to social organization, political power, and cultural identity in Mesopotamian societies. Religious studies expertise enables comparison between Anunnaki worship and other ancient religious systems, revealing patterns of influence and development across different cultures. Computer science applications provide tools for analyzing large datasets of texts and artifacts, identifying patterns that would be impossible to detect through manual analysis alone. The integration of different disciplinary perspectives creates more complete and nuanced understanding of ancient divine concepts than any single approach could achieve. Collaborative research teams often make discoveries that wouldn't be possible through individual scholarship, demonstrating the value of interdisciplinary cooperation in advancing knowledge about ancient civilizations and their religious systems. 71. The rejected alternative theory. Among alternative theories about ancient history, few have gained more popular attention than Zecharia Sitchin's claim that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors from a planet called Nibiru, but this interpretation has been universally rejected by mainstream Assyriologists due to fundamental translation errors. Sitchin's 12th planet theory captivated popular imagination by suggesting that ancient Mesopotamian texts describe space travel, genetic engineering, and contact with alien civilizations rather than traditional religious mythology. However, professional scholars who specialize in ancient Mesopotamian languages have systematically examined Sitchin's translations and found them to be filled with basic errors in Sumerian and Akkadian grammar and vocabulary. The academic critique of Sitchin's work isn't based on closed-mindedness or conspiracy, but on verifiable linguistic analysis that can be checked by anyone with appropriate language training. Sitchin's interpretations often relied on translating individual words out of context, ignoring grammatical structures, and imposing modern concepts onto ancient texts that don't support such readings. Professional Assyriologists have published detailed responses to Sitchin's claims, systematically documenting translation errors and explaining what ancient texts actually say about Anunnaki deities. The rejection of Sitchin's theories by mainstream scholarship reflects the academic community's commitment to accurate translation and evidence-based interpretation of ancient texts. The popularity of alternative theories like Sitchin's demonstrates public fascination with ancient mysteries while highlighting the importance of scholarly expertise in understanding ancient cultures. 72. Documented translation errors. Academic critics have methodically documented over 200 specific translation errors in Zecharia Sitchin's work, including fundamental misunderstandings of Sumerian grammar and vocabulary that invalidate his claims about Anunnaki extraterrestrial origins. These aren't minor disagreements about nuanced interpretations, but basic mistakes in reading ancient texts that demonstrate unfamiliarity with established linguistic principles. Professional Assyriologists have published detailed analyses showing how Sitchin consistently mistranslated key terms, ignored grammatical contexts, and misunderstood fundamental aspects of ancient Mesopotamian writing systems. Some of Sitchin's errors involve translating individual cuneiform signs without considering how they function within larger grammatical structures, leading to meanings that make no sense in ancient linguistic contexts. Other mistakes involve imposing modern scientific concepts onto ancient religious vocabulary that had entirely different meanings in original cultural contexts. Academic institutions have created resources that systematically compare Sitchin's translations with established scholarly consensus, allowing interested readers to verify translation accuracy for themselves. The documentation of these errors serves educational purposes, helping people understand the difference between legitimate scholarly translation and speculative interpretation. The systematic nature of Sitchin's translation errors suggests deliberate misrepresentation rather than honest mistakes, according to some academic critics. The availability of accurate translations allows readers to understand what ancient Anunnaki texts actually say about these fascinating deities and their role in Mesopotamian civilization. 73. Television's impact on popular perception. The Ancient Aliens television series has featured the Anunnaki in multiple episodes, reaching millions of viewers worldwide with speculative theories about extraterrestrial visitation that bear little resemblance to actual academic understanding of these ancient deities. The show's format presents alternative theories with production values and authoritative narration that can make speculative claims appear factual to viewers unfamiliar with genuine archaeological and linguistic evidence. Episodes about the Anunnaki typically mix legitimate archaeological footage with speculative interpretation, creating programming that appears educational while promoting ideas rejected by relevant academic experts. The television series has significantly influenced popular understanding of the Anunnaki, often serving as the primary source of information for people who haven't encountered academic scholarship on ancient Mesopotamian religion. The show's impact extends beyond entertainment, influencing how museum visitors and tourists interpret ancient Mesopotamian artifacts and archaeological sites. Educational institutions and museums have responded to this influence by creating programs specifically designed to provide accurate information about ancient Mesopotamian civilization and religious practices. The popularity of such programming demonstrates strong public interest in ancient mysteries and alternative historical theories, even when those theories lack scholarly support. The challenge for educators is channeling this popular interest toward genuine understanding of ancient cultures and their remarkable achievements in religion, art, and civilization. 74. Modern pagan revival. Contemporary pagan movements have adopted Anunnaki deities from modern worship practices, creating new religious traditions that blend ancient Mesopotamian mythology with contemporary spiritual concerns, including environmentalism and gender equality. These modern practitioners aren't attempting to recreate ancient Mesopotamian religion exactly, but are adapting ancient divine concepts to address current spiritual needs and social values. Neo-pagan Anunnaki worship often emphasizes the feminine aspects of these deities, particularly goddesses like Inanna/Ishtar, as part of broader movements toward goddess spirituality and feminist religious practice. Environmental themes are frequently incorporated into modern Anunnaki worship, with deities like Enki being invoked for protection of water resources and ecological balance. Online communities have formed around modern Anunnaki worship, sharing information about ancient texts, discussing interpretive approaches, and developing contemporary ritual practices. These modern religious movements demonstrate the continuing appeal of ancient divine concepts and their ability to provide spiritual meaning for contemporary practitioners. Academic scholars sometimes collaborate with modern pagan communities, providing historical context and accurate translations while respecting contemporary spiritual practices. The revival of interest in Anunnaki worship reflects broader cultural trends toward ancient wisdom traditions and alternative spiritual practices in modern society. The adaptation of ancient deities to modern concerns shows how religious concepts can evolve while maintaining connections to their historical origins. 75. Gaming and Ancient Mythology. The 2009 video game, The Conduit, incorporated Anunnaki mythology into its science fiction plot, demonstrating how ancient divine concepts continue to inspire modern entertainment media and capture public imagination. The game's storyline blended traditional Anunnaki myths with contemporary conspiracy theories and science fiction elements, creating an interactive experience that introduced players to ancient Mesopotamian religious concepts. Video game incorporation of ancient mythology serves educational functions by exposing players to historical concepts they might not encounter elsewhere, sparking interest in ancient cultures and civilizations. The gaming industry's use of ancient divine concepts reflects the enduring narrative power of mythological themes and their ability to enhance storytelling in modern media. Other video games have similarly incorporated ancient Mesopotamian elements, creating a growing library of interactive entertainment that draws inspiration from Anunnaki mythology and related ancient traditions. The visual design challenges of representing ancient deities in modern gaming have led to creative interpretations that balance historical authenticity with contemporary aesthetic preferences. Gaming communities often develop interest in historical sources that inspire their favorite games, creating opportunities for educational outreach about ancient civilizations. The success of mythology-based gaming demonstrates the commercial viability of ancient cultural themes in modern entertainment markets. Interactive media provides new ways for people to engage with ancient religious concepts and develop personal connections to historical cultures. 76. The bestseller phenomenon. Books promoting theories about Anunnaki, ancient astronauts, consistently appear on bestseller lists worldwide, demonstrating strong public interest in alternative interpretations of ancient history despite academic rejection of these theories. The commercial success of such books reflects widespread fascination with ancient mysteries and desire for explanations that connect ancient civilizations to modern scientific concepts. Publishers have developed entire market categories around ancient astronaut theories, indicating sustained consumer demand for this type of speculative historical content. The popularity of these books often overshadows academic publications about actual Mesopotamian archaeology and religious studies, creating challenges for scholarly outreach and public education. Bestseller success has enabled authors of alternative theories to reach much larger audiences than academic scholars, influencing public understanding of ancient civilizations through widely distributed but often inaccurate information. The phenomenon demonstrates the importance of accessible science communication and the need for engaging popular presentations of legitimate archaeological and historical research. Some authors have successfully combined academic accuracy with popular appeal, creating books that both educate and entertain without promoting unfounded theories. The challenge for educational institutions is competing with sensationalized content while maintaining scholarly integrity and accuracy. The bestseller market for ancient astronaut theories reveals significant public appetite for learning about ancient civilizations, even when guided by questionable interpretive frameworks. 77. Social media and ancient mysteries. Social media platforms contain thousands of posts about Anunnaki extraterrestrial theories, often mixing legitimate archaeological photographs with speculative interpretations that can mislead viewers about actual academic understanding of these ancient deities. The visual nature of platforms like Instagram and Facebook makes them particularly effective for spreading both accurate and inaccurate information about ancient artifacts and archaeological discoveries. Users frequently share images of genuine Mesopotamian art alongside captions that promote alternative theories about ancient astronaut visitation, creating confusion about what archaeologists have actually discovered. The rapid sharing capability of social media can spread misinformation faster than scholars can provide corrective information, creating ongoing challenges for science communication. Educational institutions and museums have responded by developing social media strategies designed to provide accurate information about ancient civilizations and archaeological discoveries. The democratized nature of social media means that anyone can present themselves as an expert on ancient history, regardless of their actual qualifications or knowledge. However, social media also provides opportunities for legitimate scholars to reach broader audiences and engage directly with public questions about ancient civilizations. The challenge is distinguishing between reliable and unreliable sources in environments where all voices can appear equally authoritative. The phenomenon highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking skills for evaluating information about ancient history and archaeology. 78. Ancient myths and modern conspiracies. Contemporary conspiracy theories often incorporate the Anunnaki into narratives about secret societies, global politics, and hidden power structures, demonstrating how ancient mythology continues to be adapted to address modern social and political anxieties. These modern conspiracy frameworks typically cast the Anunnaki as puppet masters controlling human civilization from behind the scenes, fundamentally misrepresenting the original religious and cultural context of these ancient deities. The adaptation of ancient divine concepts to modern conspiracy theories reflects broader patterns of how mythological narratives are reinterpreted to address contemporary concerns and fears. Social media and internet communities have facilitated the spread of these conspiracy theories, creating online environments where alternative historical interpretations can flourish without scholarly oversight. The incorporation of ancient Mesopotamian elements into modern conspiracy theories often involves selective quotation of archaeological evidence while ignoring contradictory information. Educational responses to these phenomena require careful balance between respecting people's beliefs and providing accurate information about ancient civilizations and their actual historical contexts. The persistence of these conspiracy theories demonstrates the ongoing human need for explanatory narratives that connect ancient wisdom to contemporary experience. Academic institutions have developed strategies for addressing conspiracy theories while maintaining respectful dialogue with people who hold alternative beliefs. The phenomenon illustrates how ancient religious concepts continue to evolve and adapt to serve modern psychological and social functions. 79. The challenge of public education. The widespread acceptance of alternative theories about the Anunnaki represents a significant challenge for public education about ancient history, requiring innovative approaches to science communication and archaeological outreach. Traditional academic publishing and conference presentations often fail to reach general audiences who may be more exposed to sensationalized content through popular media and social networks. Educational institutions have recognized the need for more engaging public programming that can compete with entertainment-focused content while maintaining scholarly accuracy. The challenge involves creating content that satisfies public curiosity about ancient mysteries while providing solid grounding in legitimate archaeological and historical evidence. Museums have developed interactive exhibits and educational programs specifically designed to address public misconceptions about ancient civilizations while fostering genuine appreciation for archaeological discoveries. Digital humanities projects increasingly focus on making scholarly research accessible to general audiences through user-friendly websites and multimedia presentations. The success of science communication and archaeology depends on understanding public interests and concerns while providing clear, engaging explanations of complex historical and cultural concepts. Collaboration between scholars and media professionals has produced educational content that successfully combines academic rigor with popular appeal. The ongoing challenge requires sustained effort from educational institutions to maintain public access to accurate information about ancient civilizations and their remarkable achievements. 80. Museums respond to popular interest. Museums worldwide have significantly increased their educational outreach programs about Mesopotamian archaeology, developing new exhibits and educational materials partly in response to public interest generated by alternative theories about ancient civilizations. Rather than simply dismissing popular misconceptions, many museums have chosen to engage constructively with public curiosity about ancient mysteries by providing accurate information in accessible formats. Special exhibitions about Mesopotamian civilization often include sections specifically addressing common questions and misconceptions about ancient Sumerian and Babylonian cultures. Interactive displays allow visitors to examine actual artifacts while learning about genuine archaeological discoveries and scholarly interpretations based on material evidence. Educational programs often feature presentations by professional archaeologists and Assyriologists who can explain how scholars actually interpret ancient texts and artifacts. Virtual museum tours and online resources make accurate information about ancient Mesopotamian civilization accessible to global audiences who cannot visit physical exhibitions. Museum gift shops increasingly stock books and materials that provide scholarly perspectives on ancient civilizations alongside popular works, giving visitors access to different viewpoints. The expansion of museum programming demonstrates how cultural institutions can respond positively to public interest while maintaining educational mission and scholarly integrity. These initiatives help bridge the gap between academic research and public understanding, creating opportunities for meaningful engagement with ancient cultures and their achievements. 81. Divine Kingship's Political Legacy. The concept of divine kingship established by Anunnaki worship profoundly influenced political systems throughout the ancient Near East and beyond, creating governmental models that connected earthly authority to cosmic order in ways that shaped human political development for millennia. This influence extended far beyond Mesopotamian borders, appearing in modified forms in Egyptian pharaonic ideology, Persian imperial theory, and eventually Roman concepts of divine imperial authority. The basic principle that legitimate political power required divine sanction became foundational to numerous political systems across different cultures and historical periods. Medieval European concepts of divine right monarchy directly descended from these ancient Mesopotamian ideas about the relationship between divine approval and earthly rulership. The influence appears not just in royal ideology, but in constitutional frameworks that sought to balance divine authority with human governance, creating systems of checks and balances rooted in theological concepts. Modern democratic systems retain ceremonial elements that echo these ancient ideas, including oath-taking procedures and symbolic connections to transcendent authority sources. The persistence of these political concepts demonstrates the enduring power of religious ideas to shape governmental structures and popular understanding of political legitimacy. Contemporary political science continues to grapple with questions about the relationship between religious belief and political authority that were first systematically explored in ancient Mesopotamian Anunnaki worship. 82. Biblical connections and scholarly debate. Biblical scholars have identified potential connections between Anunnaki mythology and various stories in the book of Genesis, though the extent and nature of direct influence remains a subject of ongoing academic debate and careful scholarly investigation. Similarities include flood narratives, creation accounts involving divine beings working with clay, and references to sons of God that some scholars connect to ancient Mesopotamian divine hierarchies. The geographical proximity of ancient Israel to Mesopotamian civilizations creates plausible opportunities for cultural transmission of religious concepts and mythological narratives across different traditions. Archaeological evidence shows extensive contact between Mesopotamian and Hebrew cultures through trade, migration, and political relationships that could have facilitated religious influence. However, scholars debate whether similarities reflect direct borrowing, common ancient Near Eastern cultural heritage, or independent development of similar theological concepts. The academic approach to these potential connections requires careful analysis of textual evidence, historical context, and cultural transmission mechanisms rather than simple assumption of influence. Some biblical scholars argue for significant Mesopotamian influence on Hebrew religious development, while others emphasize the distinctiveness of biblical traditions. The debate demonstrates the complexity of tracing religious influence across ancient cultures and the importance of rigorous scholarly methodology in making such connections. These discussions continue to inform understanding of how ancient religious traditions developed and influenced each other across cultural boundaries. 83. Influence on Jewish religious concepts. The Anunnaki concept of annual divine assemblies where gods gathered to determine human fate for the coming year bears striking similarities to later Jewish concepts of divine judgment that may have contributed to the development of Rosh Hashanah traditions. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe regular divine councils where Anunnaki deities reviewed human behavior and decreed destinies for individuals and communities in systematic annual processes. These divine assemblies involved formal procedures for evaluating human actions, considering requests for mercy, and establishing cosmic policies that would govern the coming year. The Jewish High Holy Days include similar concepts of annual divine judgment, where human actions are reviewed and destinies determined for the following year through divine deliberation. Historical contact between Jewish and Mesopotamian cultures during exile periods provided opportunities for religious concept transmission and adaptation. However, scholars emphasize that Jewish development of these concepts involved significant theological innovation and adaptation rather than simple borrowing. The parallel development demonstrates how fundamental human concerns about justice, accountability, and divine oversight of moral behavior appear across different religious traditions. Modern Jewish scholarship continues to explore these potential connections while maintaining focus on the distinctive theological contributions of Jewish religious thought. The comparison illustrates how ancient religious concepts can influence later traditions while being transformed through different cultural and theological frameworks. 84. Islamic medieval scholarship. During the medieval period, Islamic scholars demonstrated remarkable intellectual curiosity by studying available Mesopotamian sources and attempting to reconcile Anunnaki mythology with Quranic cosmology, creating sophisticated theological syntheses that integrated ancient and Islamic concepts. These medieval Muslim intellectuals had access to ancient texts and traditions that provided information about pre-Islamic Mesopotamian religious beliefs and mythological systems. Rather than simply rejecting ancient traditions as incompatible with Islam, many scholars sought to understand how earlier divine concepts might relate to Islamic theological frameworks. Some attempted to identify ancient Mesopotamian deities with Islamic concepts of angels, jinn, or other spiritual beings mentioned in the Quran and Islamic tradition. Others explored whether ancient flood narratives and creation stories might preserve authentic memories of events described in Islamic sources. The scholarly approach involved careful textual analysis and theological reasoning designed to distinguish between authentic ancient wisdom and incompatible pagan beliefs. These intellectual efforts contributed to broader Islamic traditions of engaging with pre-Islamic knowledge while maintaining Islamic theological integrity. The medieval Islamic approach to ancient Mesopotamian traditions demonstrates sophisticated intellectual methods for dealing with religious diversity and cultural heritage. Modern Islamic scholarship continues to explore these historical connections while emphasizing the distinctiveness of Islamic revelation and religious understanding. 85. Renaissance rediscovery and biblical scholarship. The Renaissance rediscovery of Mesopotamian texts created revolutionary changes in biblical chronology and human origin theories, profoundly influencing early modern scholarship and challenging traditional European understanding of ancient history. Medieval European knowledge of ancient civilizations was largely limited to biblical and classical sources, with little awareness of independent Mesopotamian historical and religious traditions. Renaissance scholars gained access to ancient texts through expanded trade relationships and archaeological exploration that revealed sophisticated civilizations predating biblical accounts. The discovery of Mesopotamian flood narratives that were clearly older than biblical accounts forced reconsideration of traditional chronologies and source relationships. Creation stories involving divine beings working with clay and breath provided new context for understanding biblical creation accounts and their ancient Near Eastern backgrounds. Early modern biblical scholarship began developing more sophisticated understanding of how biblical texts related to broader ancient Near Eastern cultural and religious contexts. These discoveries contributed to development of historical critical approaches to biblical interpretation that considered cultural and literary contexts alongside traditional theological readings. The Renaissance engagement with ancient Mesopotamian sources established patterns of comparative religious study that continue to influence modern biblical scholarship. The period demonstrated how archaeological discoveries could transform understanding of religious history and the development of ancient cultures. 86. Modern legal systems' ancient roots. Contemporary legal systems retain identifiable traces of Mesopotamian concepts of divine justice that were originally associated with Anunnaki authority and cosmic law, demonstrating the enduring influence of ancient religious concepts on modern institutional development. Ancient Mesopotamian legal systems were explicitly grounded in divine authority, with earthly courts understood as extensions of cosmic justice administered under Anunnaki oversight. Concepts including presumption of innocence, proportional punishment, and systematic legal procedure can be traced to Mesopotamian precedents that connected earthly justice to divine principles. Modern oath-taking procedures echo ancient practices where legal proceedings invoked divine oversight and supernatural consequences for perjury or false testimony. The concept of law as universal principle transcending individual human authority derives from ancient ideas about cosmic justice administered by divine beings. Contemporary constitutional frameworks that seek to balance competing interests reflect ancient Mesopotamian understanding of justice as harmony between different cosmic forces. Legal concepts of precedent and systematic jurisprudence show influence from ancient traditions that understood law as revealed divine wisdom rather than human invention. Modern courtroom architecture and ceremonial procedures retain symbolic elements that connect legal proceedings to transcendent authority sources. The persistence of these ancient influences demonstrates how fundamental legal concepts can maintain continuity across vast spans of cultural and technological change. 87. Literary influence and biblical parallels. The Epic of Gilgamesh flood narrative, featuring prominent roles for Anunnaki deities in cosmic destruction and preservation, has been extensively studied as a possible literary source that influenced the biblical account of Noah and the Great Flood. Scholarly analysis reveals numerous specific parallels between Mesopotamian and biblical flood accounts, including divine decisions to destroy humanity, individual preservation of righteousness, and post-flood covenant establishment. The Mesopotamian account is demonstrably older than biblical versions, with archaeological evidence dating Gilgamesh traditions to the 3rd millennium BCE. Textual similarities include specific details like bird messengers, mountain landing sites, and divine regret over destruction that suggest potential literary relationship rather than coincidental parallel development. Historical evidence shows extensive cultural contact between Mesopotamian and Hebrew communities that could have facilitated literary transmission and adaptation. However, biblical scholars emphasize that Hebrew adaptations involved significant theological transformation that created distinctively monotheistic interpretations of ancient narrative themes. The relationship demonstrates how ancient literary traditions could be adapted and transformed while maintaining recognizable narrative structures and thematic elements. Modern literary scholarship continues to explore these relationships as examples of how ancient texts influenced each other across cultural boundaries. The study illuminates broader patterns of how religious narratives develop through interaction between different cultural traditions and theological frameworks. 88. divine hierarchy's lasting impact. Mesopotamian concepts of divine hierarchy, with the Anunnaki serving as cosmic aristocracy governing universal order, profoundly influenced later Greek and Roman pantheons, where many deities exhibit clear characteristics derived from ancient Mesopotamian divine models. The systematic organization of divine beings into hierarchical structures with specific roles and authorities provided templates that were adapted by subsequent religious traditions. Greek Olympian deities show clear parallels to Mesopotamian divine functions, with gods governing similar domains and exhibiting comparable relationships between higher and lower divine authorities. Roman adaptation of Greek religious concepts preserved and transmitted these hierarchical patterns that ultimately derived from ancient Mesopotamian theological frameworks. The concept of divine councils, where multiple deities deliberated about cosmic policies, appears throughout ancient Mediterranean religious traditions, with clear Mesopotamian precedents. Artistic representations of divine assemblies and hierarchical relationships show consistent iconographic elements that can be traced from Mesopotamian sources through later cultural adaptations. The influence extended beyond formal religious systems to impact philosophical concepts about cosmic order and universal governance that shaped Western intellectual development. Modern comparative religious studies continues to trace these influences as examples of how foundational religious concepts spread across cultural boundaries through historical transmission. The persistence of these hierarchical concepts demonstrates the enduring appeal of systematic approaches to understanding divine authority and cosmic organization. 89. Architectural legacy across continents. The ziggurat architecture associated with Anunnaki worship established design principles for monumental religious building that influenced sacred architecture throughout the ancient world, from Mesopotamian temples to Southeast Asian monuments like Borobudur. Ziggurats represented theological concepts about cosmic mountains that connected earthly and divine realms, creating architectural symbolism that resonated across different religious traditions. The stepped pyramid design, with ascending levels leading to sacred summits, provided visual metaphors for spiritual ascension that appeared in various forms across multiple cultures. Mesopotamian architectural techniques for creating massive stepped structures influenced engineering approaches to monumental construction throughout the ancient Near East and beyond. Trade and cultural contact spread architectural knowledge along with religious concepts, creating opportunities for technological and symbolic transmission across vast geographical distances. Later cultures adapted ziggurat principles to their own religious frameworks while maintaining the basic concept of elevated sacred spaces that brought worshippers closer to divine realms. Archaeological evidence shows clear architectural relationships between Mesopotamian ziggurats and later monumental religious structures across Asia and the Americas. The persistence of stepped pyramid architecture in religious context demonstrates how architectural symbolism can maintain meaning across different cultural and temporal contexts. Modern architectural historians continue to trace these influences as examples of how religious concepts shape built environments across human civilizations. 90. Archaeological methodologies development. Modern archaeological methods were significantly developed through the challenges of studying Mesopotamian sites, with Anunnaki-related discoveries driving methodological innovations that transformed how archaeologists approach ancient religious sites worldwide. Early excavations at Mesopotamian sites encountered unprecedented preservation conditions and artifact types that required new techniques for documentation, preservation, and analysis. The discovery of extensive cuneiform archives necessitated development of specialized methods for handling, preserving, and studying fragile clay tablets containing religious texts. Architectural excavation of massive temple complexes required innovative approaches to stratigraphic analysis and site documentation that could handle millennia of continuous occupation and rebuilding. The integration of textual and material evidence from Anunnaki worship sites pioneered interdisciplinary approaches that combined archaeological and linguistic methodologies. Conservation techniques for preserving ancient artifacts and architectural features were largely developed through work on Mesopotamian religious sites and their unique preservation challenges. Digital documentation methods, now standard in archaeology, were first extensively tested on complex Mesopotamian sites with their vast quantities of artifacts and textual materials. The methodological innovations developed for Mesopotamian archaeology have become standard approaches used at ancient sites worldwide, improving archaeological practice globally. Contemporary archaeological education continues to use Mesopotamian sites as training grounds for developing excavation and analysis skills applicable to diverse archaeological contexts. 91. The Lost and Found Genesis. In 1893, a University of Pennsylvania archaeological expedition working in the ruins of ancient Nippur made a discovery that would revolutionize understanding of humanity's earliest flood narratives, though the significance of their find wouldn't be recognized for nearly 2 decades. Among thousands of cuneiform tablets recovered from the site was a fragmented text that contained what would later be identified as the Eridu Genesis, the earliest known version of the Great Flood story that predates all other surviving accounts. The tablet sat in storage for 19 years before scholars realized they possessed a version of the flood narrative that was older than any previously known text, including the famous account in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This delay in recognition illustrates the enormous challenges faced by early archaeologists who often discovered far more material than they could immediately process and understand. The Eridu Genesis features Anunnaki deities in central roles, showing how flood mythology was intimately connected to these divine beings from its earliest recorded forms. The tablet's late recognition also demonstrates how archaeological treasures can remain hidden in plain sight, waiting for scholars with appropriate expertise to understand their significance. This pattern of delayed discovery continues today, with important artifacts sometimes sitting unrecognized in museum collections for decades. 92. Divine jewelry for daily protection. Among the most ingenious creations of ancient Mesopotamian craftsmen were cylinder seals that functioned as both sacred religious artifacts and elegant personal jewelry, allowing wearers to carry divine protection with them in their daily lives. These remarkable objects were designed with gold caps, silver mounting systems, and chain attachments that enabled them to be worn as necklaces, bracelets, or other personal ornaments. The dual functionality reflected sophisticated understanding of how religious practice could be integrated into everyday life rather than confined to temple ceremonies and formal worship occasions. Wearing an Anunnaki-inscribed seal provided continuous divine protection, while serving as a visible symbol of the wearer's piety and social status within the community. The seal's portable nature made them ideal for travelers who needed divine protection while journeying through territories governed by unfamiliar local deities. Archaeological discoveries show that these jewelry seals were often buried with their owners, suggesting they were believed to provide divine protection in the afterlife as well as during earthly existence. The craftsmanship required to create functional seals that were also beautiful jewelry demonstrates the high level of skill achieved by ancient Mesopotamian artisans. Modern jewelry designers still struggle to match the technical and artistic sophistication of these ancient dual-purpose religious artifacts. 93. The mystery of Babylon's gardens. Excavations at ancient Babylon have revealed evidence suggesting that the famous hanging gardens mentioned by classical Greek and Roman authors may have been confused with the elaborate sacred gardens that surrounded Anunnaki temple complexes throughout the city. Classical writers described magnificent elevated gardens with sophisticated irrigation systems that seemed to defy the natural landscape of the Mesopotamian plains. However, archaeological investigation has found no definitive evidence for the specific garden complex described in classical sources, leading to one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries. What excavations have revealed are extensive remains of temple gardens associated with various Anunnaki shrines, featuring elevated planting areas, complex water management systems, and elaborate landscaping designed to create earthly paradises for divine habitation. These temple gardens used advanced hydraulic engineering to create lush environments that contrasted dramatically with the surrounding arid landscape, potentially inspiring the classical descriptions. The confusion may have arisen because Greek and Roman visitors to Babylon encountered multiple garden complexes associated with different temples and combined their descriptions into accounts of a single monumental garden. The sacred gardens served important religious functions, providing physical manifestations of divine blessing and fertility that demonstrated the Anunnaki's power to transform the natural world. Archaeological analysis of these garden remains continues to reveal sophisticated horticultural and engineering knowledge that challenges assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. 94. The sacred science of divine pronunciation. Ancient Mesopotamian priests underwent years of rigorous training to master the proper pronunciation of Anunnaki divine names, with religious authorities understanding that incorrect pronunciation could be dangerous or sacrilegious. The training involved memorizing not just the sounds of divine names, but their precise rhythmic patterns, tonal variations, and ceremonial context that determined appropriate usage. Different religious ceremonies required specific pronunciations of the same divine names, with variations that reflected different aspects of each deity's personality and authority. The complexity of divine pronunciation reflected theological understanding that names possessed inherent power and that speaking them correctly was essential for establishing proper divine relationships. Mispronunciation wasn't simply embarrassing, but potentially catastrophic, as it might offend powerful divine beings or invoke unintended supernatural consequences. The training process created a specialized priestly class whose expertise in divine linguistics made them essential intermediaries between human communities and Anunnaki deities. Written texts provided only partial guidance for pronunciation, with much knowledge transmitted through oral traditions that required personal instruction from experienced masters. The emphasis on correct pronunciation influenced the development of sophisticated linguistic traditions that contributed to advances in grammar, phonetics, and language study. Modern scholars studying ancient Mesopotamian religion must reconstruct these pronunciation traditions through careful analysis of textual evidence and comparative linguistic methods. 95. Divine commerce and business contracts. The discovery of administrative tablets at the ancient trading city of Kanesh revealed that Assyrian merchants routinely invoked Anunnaki deities in their business contracts, demonstrating the complete integration of religious and commercial activities in ancient Mesopotamian society. These business documents show that commercial transactions weren't simply secular affairs, but religious activities requiring divine oversight and supernatural enforcement mechanisms. Merchants called upon specific Anunnaki deities to witness contracts, guarantee honest dealing, and punish anyone who violated agreed terms through supernatural intervention. The practice created a form of divine commercial law that extended far beyond human legal systems, ensuring that business relationships were governed by cosmic justice as well as earthly regulations. Trade contracts often specified which Anunnaki deities would be responsible for different aspects of commercial agreements, creating detailed divine oversight of complex business relationships. The integration of divine authority into commerce helped create trust networks that enabled long-distance trade across territories with different political systems and legal frameworks. Merchants traveling to foreign lands could rely on shared Anunnaki worship to establish business relationships with partners who recognize the same divine authorities. The discovery demonstrates how thoroughly religion permeated ancient Mesopotamian life, influencing even practical commercial activities through supernatural considerations. Modern business practices retain ceremonial elements that echo these ancient connections between divine authority and commercial relationships. 96. Voluntary sacrifice and divine service. Excavations at Uar's Royal Cemetery revealed shocking evidence that the 74 human beings found buried with their rulers had likely chosen to die voluntarily, believing they would continue serving their masters in the divine realm of the Anunnaki. Archaeological analysis of the burial positions and physical remains suggests that these individuals consumed poison and carefully arranged themselves in orderly formations around their deceased rulers. The systematic nature of the burials indicates careful planning and willing participation rather than forced execution, with attendants dressed in their finest clothing and positioned with their personal possessions. This voluntary sacrifice reflected profound religious beliefs about the continuation of service relationships beyond death and the ability to join rulers in serving the Anunnaki directly. The individuals who chose sacrifice likely believed they were gaining access to divine realms that would otherwise be closed to people of their social status. The discovery challenges modern assumptions about ancient attitudes toward death and reveals the extraordinary power of religious beliefs to motivate ultimate personal sacrifice. The careful preservation of these burial scenes provides unique insights into ancient Mesopotamian concepts of afterlife, social relationships, and religious duty. The evidence suggests that death was understood not as ending, but as transformation that enabled continued service to both earthly masters and divine authorities. Modern analysis of these remains continues to provide information about ancient religious practices and social structures. 97. The impossibly long reigns. The Sumerian king list presents one of ancient literature's most puzzling claims: that some early rulers reigned for tens of thousands of years, possibly reflecting the influence of long-lived Anunnaki deities on ancient concepts of human longevity and divine kingship. The list records rulers with reigns lasting 28,800 years, 36,000 years, or even longer periods that far exceed any possible human lifespan under normal biological conditions. These extraordinary numbers weren't random, but followed mathematical patterns that suggest symbolic rather than literal meanings related to cosmic cycles and divine time measurements. The long reigns may represent attempts to connect human history with divine timescales, suggesting that early rulers participated in cosmic time rather than ordinary human temporal experience. Alternatively, the numbers might compress multiple generations of rulers into single entries, with reigns representing dynastic periods rather than individual lifespans. The influence of Anunnaki worship appears in the assumption that rulers blessed by divine authority might transcend normal human limitations, including natural lifespans. The list demonstrates ancient attempts to create comprehensive historical records that connected human civilization with cosmic history and divine intervention. The mathematical precision of these impossible numbers suggests sophisticated numerical traditions that encoded theological concepts within historical documentation. Modern scholars continue to debate the meaning and purpose of these extraordinary chronological claims. 98. Genetic continuity across millennia. Recent advances in ancient DNA analysis have revealed remarkable genetic continuity between ancient Mesopotamian populations who worship the Anunnaki and modern Middle Eastern communities, demonstrating direct biological connections across thousands of years. Scientific analysis of skeletal remains from ancient Mesopotamian burial sites shows that these populations possess genetic diversity that contradicts theories about racially uniform, chosen peoples favored by specific deities. The genetic evidence reveals complex patterns of migration, intermarriage, and cultural exchange that created ethnically diverse communities united by shared religious traditions rather than biological heritage. Modern populations throughout the Middle East carry genetic markers that connect them directly to ancient Mesopotamian communities, making them literal descendants of Anunnaki worshippers. This genetic continuity provides physical evidence for cultural transmission mechanisms that preserved ancient religious concepts and traditional knowledge across vast spans of time. The diversity within ancient populations also supports archaeological evidence for cosmopolitan religious communities that welcome participants from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Genetic analysis helps scholars understand how ancient religious traditions spread through population movements, intermarriage, and cultural adaptation rather than conquest or forced conversion. The scientific evidence demonstrates that ancient Anunnaki worship created inclusive religious communities that transcended ethnic and tribal boundaries. Modern genetic research continues to illuminate the complex relationships between ancient populations and contemporary communities in the regions where Anunnaki worship flourished. 99. Ancient astronomical achievements. The mathematical precision of Mesopotamian astronomy, which was used to predict when Anunnaki deities would be favorable for various activities, demonstrated sophisticated scientific knowledge that surpassed European astronomical achievements until the Renaissance period. Ancient Mesopotamian astronomers developed complex mathematical systems for tracking planetary movements, predicting eclipses, and calculating celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. These calculations weren't purely scientific, but served religious functions by determining optimal times for approaching specific Anunnaki deities based on their associations with celestial bodies. The astronomical knowledge was preserved in cuneiform texts that recorded centuries of careful observation and mathematical analysis of celestial phenomena. Mesopotamian astronomers could predict lunar eclipses, track planetary positions, and calculate calendar systems with precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the development of modern mathematical astronomy. The integration of astronomy with Anunnaki worship created sophisticated systems for divine timing that influenced everything from agricultural planning to military campaigns. The mathematical techniques developed for religious astronomy contributed to advances in general mathematics that influenced technological and scientific development throughout the ancient world. European Renaissance astronomers studying preserved Mesopotamian texts discovered mathematical methods and observational techniques that helped advance their own scientific work. The astronomical achievements demonstrate how religious motivation could drive scientific innovation and mathematical sophistication in ancient civilizations. 100. The persistence of ancient faith. Archaeological evidence suggests that references to the Anunnaki pantheon continued to appear in ritual contexts as late as the 1st century CE, making their worship tradition one of the longest-lasting religious systems in human history, spanning over 2,000 years. Even after the rise of newer religious movements, including Christianity and various mystery cults, some communities maintained traditional Anunnaki worship practices. The persistence occurred primarily in rural areas and conservative religious communities that preserved ancient traditions despite changing urban religious preferences. Late references to Anunnaki deities appear in ritual texts, magical formulas, and religious inscriptions that demonstrate continued belief in their power and relevance. The gradual decline of Anunnaki worship reflected broader cultural changes rather than sudden religious revolution, with traditional practices slowly giving way to newer spiritual alternatives. Some Anunnaki traditions were absorbed into later religious systems, preserving ancient concepts in modified forms that maintained continuity with earlier worship practices. The longevity of Anunnaki worship demonstrates the enduring appeal of these ancient divine concepts and their ability to adapt to changing cultural circumstances. Archaeological evidence for this persistence continues to emerge from excavations at sites that were occupied continuously from ancient times through the early Christian period. The 2-millennium span of Anunnaki worship makes it one of the most durable religious traditions in recorded human history. 101. Philosophical legacy of divine destiny. The Mesopotamian concept of the Tablet of Destinies controlled by Anunnaki deities profoundly influenced later Greek concepts of fate and Roman ideas about divine providence, creating philosophical traditions that shaped Western thought about predestination and cosmic order. The image of divine beings literally writing human destinies on cosmic tablets provided a concrete metaphor for understanding how individual lives related to universal planning and divine oversight. Greek philosophical traditions adapted these concepts into abstract discussions of fate, necessity, and the relationship between divine knowledge and human free will. Roman political theory incorporated ideas about divine providence that drew heavily on Mesopotamian concepts of cosmic planning and divine governmental oversight. The influence appears in philosophical works by Plato, Aristotle, and later thinkers who grappled with questions about determinism and divine knowledge that originated in ancient Mesopotamian religious thought. Christian theology encountered these concepts through Greek philosophical traditions, leading to complex theological debates about predestination and divine sovereignty. Islamic philosophical traditions similarly engaged with concepts of divine decree and human destiny that showed clear influence from ancient Mesopotamian religious frameworks. The persistence of these ideas demonstrates how fundamental theological concepts can maintain influence across multiple religious and philosophical traditions. Modern philosophical discussions of determinism, free will, and cosmic purpose continue to engage with questions that were first systematically explored in Anunnaki worship traditions. 102. Engineering marvels beyond modern capability. Archaeological investigation of Anunnaki temple complexes has revealed sophisticated water management systems that utilized engineering principles and construction techniques that modern engineers struggle to replicate, suggesting advanced hydraulic knowledge that challenges assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. These systems included underground channels, pressure-controlled fountains, and climate management installations that created comfortable environments in desert climates. The engineering required precise calculations of water pressure, flow rates, and structural engineering that demanded mathematical and technical knowledge comparable to modern civil engineering. Some installations show evidence of automated systems that regulated water flow based on seasonal changes and usage patterns without requiring constant human intervention. The construction techniques involve precisely fitted stonework and waterproof sealing methods that have survived thousands of years while remaining functional. Modern attempts to recreate these systems using contemporary technology have often failed to achieve the same level of efficiency and durability demonstrated by ancient examples. The sophistication suggests that ancient Mesopotamian temple builders possessed engineering knowledge that was subsequently lost during periods of political disruption and cultural change. The water systems served both practical and religious functions, creating impressive displays of divine power while providing essential infrastructure for temple operations. Contemporary engineering studies of these ancient systems continue to reveal innovative techniques that could potentially inform modern construction and environmental management practices. 103. Ritual burial traditions across cultures. The practice of placing foundation deposits containing precious objects and royal statues in Anunnaki temples established ritual burial traditions that influenced many later cultures throughout the ancient world, creating ceremonial patterns that persisted across different religious systems. These foundation deposits weren't simply building practices, but complex religious ceremonies that transformed construction into sacred acts connecting earthly architecture with divine approval. The tradition spread beyond Mesopotamia through cultural contact, trade relationships, and political expansion that carried Mesopotamian religious concepts to distant regions. Archaeological evidence shows similar foundation deposit practices in Egyptian temples, Persian royal buildings, and even medieval European churches that preserved ancient ceremonial patterns. The ritual elements included specific types of objects, ceremonial procedures, and religious formulas that were adapted to different cultural contexts while maintaining essential spiritual functions. The persistence of these traditions demonstrates how religious practices can transcend cultural boundaries and maintain significance across different theological frameworks. Foundation deposits continue to be discovered in archaeological excavations worldwide, providing evidence for the global influence of Mesopotamian religious concepts. The practice influenced modern ceremonial traditions, including cornerstone-laying ceremonies and time capsule burial, that preserve ancient connections between construction and spiritual commemoration. The widespread adoption of these traditions illustrates how practical religious innovations can achieve remarkable geographical and temporal distribution through cultural transmission mechanisms. 104. Divine medicine and healing arts. Ancient Mesopotamian medical texts reveal extensive use of Anunnaki deities in healing rituals, with physicians understanding that physical treatment required divine intervention and supernatural healing power to achieve complete restoration of health. Medical practice wasn't separated from religious activity, but integrated divine invocation with practical treatment methods, including surgery, medication, and therapeutic procedures. Specific Anunnaki deities were associated with different types of illnesses and healing specialties, creating a divine medical system that paralleled and supported earthly medical knowledge. Healing rituals involve complex ceremonies where physicians acted as intermediaries between patients and divine healing powers, combining medical expertise with religious authority. Medical texts include detailed instructions for invoking appropriate Anunnaki deities based on specific symptoms, patient characteristics, and treatment requirements. The integration of divine and medical healing created comprehensive treatment approaches that addressed both physical symptoms and spiritual causes of illness. Archaeological evidence shows that medical facilities were often located within or adjacent to temple complexes, facilitating cooperation between physicians and religious specialists. The tradition influenced medical practices throughout the ancient world, establishing patterns of religious healing that persisted in various forms across different cultures. Modern analysis of ancient medical texts continues to reveal sophisticated understanding of both practical medicine and religious healing that characterized Mesopotamian healthcare systems. 105. The gradual religious transition. The transition from traditional Anunnaki worship to monotheistic religious systems in Mesopotamia occurred gradually over several centuries, with many people maintaining dual religious practices that combined ancient traditions with newer spiritual alternatives. This religious coexistence reflected the practical reality that established religious traditions couldn't be immediately replaced by new theological systems, regardless of political or cultural pressures. Archaeological evidence shows continued maintenance of ancient temples alongside construction of new religious facilities, suggesting parallel rather than replacement religious systems. Personal religious practices often combined elements from different traditions, with individuals maintaining relationships with traditional Anunnaki deities while exploring newer religious alternatives. The gradual transition allowed for theological dialogue and religious syncretism that preserved valuable elements from ancient traditions while accommodating innovative spiritual concepts. Rural communities typically maintained traditional practices longer than urban areas, creating geographical patterns of religious change that reflected different social and economic conditions. The transition process demonstrates how major religious changes occur through complex social negotiations rather than sudden revolutionary transformation. Some Anunnaki traditions were absorbed into later religious systems through reinterpretation and adaptation that maintained continuity while changing theological frameworks. The extended transition period explains how ancient religious concepts continued to influence later spiritual traditions even after formal Anunnaki worship had ended.